Chapter 68. What will happen? Xian asked in a low voice. Lu Chen looked at her face and slowly said, "If you fall into a trap and are captured alive, without any ability to fight back, he will first rape you, then chop your body into pieces and slowly eat them." He pointed at the bloody leopard's leg on the ground and expressionlessly said, "Just like that thing." Blarg. Xian looked at the leopard's leg and finally could not bear it anymore. Her body trembled as she rushed to the bushes at the side. She bent her body and retched. Her face was as pale as paper. Lu Chen quietly looked at her. He did not comfort her, nor did he continue to say those cruel words. After a while, Xian seemed to slowly calm down. She panted as she straightened her body and walked back step by step. She didn't dare to look at the dirty and ferocious old barbarian anymore. She didn't even dare to look at the leopard's leg on the ground. She only timidly walked to Lu Chen's side. After hesitating for a while, she said in a low voice, "Big brother Lu, let's go." "Okay." This time, Lu Chen unexpectedly agreed to her straightforwardly. This made Xian feel a little strange. But then, she saw Lu Chen turn around and walk towards the barbarian who was moaning on the ground. This man did not roar, did not scold, and did not overflow with killing intent. Even his expression did not seem to change. But Xian felt that the surrounding temperature suddenly became a little colder. The barbarian old man seemed to have sensed something as well. He howled in pain and cursed angrily. His body shrank back with all his might, leaving behind a trail of blood on the ground. But all of this was useless. Lu Chen quickly walked in front of him. Then, under the horrified gaze of Xian, he raised the black dagger and stabbed it. The incomparably sharp blade instantly pierced through the barbarian's flesh and stabbed into the barbarian's heart. The old barbarian's entire body tensed up and curled up. He shouted some strange and unclear words. After a while, the dirty and ferocious head drooped down. His body stiffened and he stopped breathing. Lu Chen pulled out his sword and walked back. His expression was indifferent, as if he had just done something very normal. He said to Xian, "You can go now." Xian blankly nodded. She looked at Lu Chen and suddenly felt an impulse in her heart. She could not help but ask, "Brother Lu, do you have a grudge against these barbarians?" Lu Chen's body paused for a moment. He did not turn back. After a while he said, "I have a grudge against them. But it is not to the extent that I have to kill them. But if someone wants to kill me first, I will kill them first." Xian was speechless. Her expression was complicated. Everything that happened in front of her, including Lu Chen, was completely different from the simple life she had met in the past. It was far beyond her understanding. If the person who saved her yesterday was a strange and brave man, then today, Lu Chen seemed to have suddenly become a completely different person. "Let's go." Lu Chen, who was in front, turned around and called out to her. Xian was shocked. She quickly replied and quickly walked over. But just as she walked past the cave and was about to walk up the slope to leave with Lu Chen, suddenly, a few sorrowful cries came from the entrance of the cave. Then, a small body climbed out of the cave with some difficulty. It was a puppy with black fur and a white stripe on its back. One of its hind legs was unnaturally drooping on the ground. It seemed to be broken. Its body was also messy and dirty. It looked extremely miserable. The puppy struggled to climb out, as if it had used up the last bit of its strength. It desperately wanted to live. Then, it barked a few times at Xian, who was not far away. "Woof, woof, woof." Xian stopped in her tracks. Her face showed that she could not bear to see it. This kind of compassion made Xian feel a little strange. In the past, when she passed by some towns, she had seen such pitiful stray dogs and cats. But at this moment, her heart seemed to be especially soft. Maybe it was because from last night until today, she suddenly saw too much killing and blood that she had never seen in her life. That kind of heavy pressure almost made it hard for her to breathe. Or maybe, she was simply soft-hearted. So, she turned around and walked towards the puppy. Lu Chen, who was in front, stopped and looked at her. He frowned. Xian walked to the side of the puppy and squatted down. She carefully looked at it and immediately found that the situation of the puppy was worse than she had imagined. In addition to the broken leg, there were at least a dozen large and small wounds and cracks on the puppy's body. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was covered with cuts and bruises. Some of the flesh near the wounds even looked a little rotten, exuding a disgusting stench. It was really hard to imagine what kind of torture this puppy had suffered in the hands of the ferocious barbarian in the past days. Let's save it. Exian turned around and shouted at Lu Chen. Lu Chen shook his head expressionlessly. Exian clenched her teeth and slowly stood up. The puppy looked at her and softly barked a few times. Exian's expression changed. The life and death experiences from last night to today flashed in her mind. Those extremely bloody scenes suddenly stimulated her to the point of nausea. She didn't know where the courage came from, or maybe it was a sudden burst of resentment after being suppressed for too long, but Exian suddenly stomped her feet and took out a piece of cloth to wrap the little black dog. She then struggled to pick it up with one hand and walked away with her head lowered. When she walked past Lu Chen, she did not dare to look at his face, but her body still paused for a moment. Then with a soft and slightly trembling voice she said, "I want to save it." After saying that, she ran forward in big strides. Lu Chen's face showed a stunned expression. Looking at the girl's back, his face showed a rare look of confusion. This woman, what is in her brain? He muttered in a low voice, shook his head and followed. However, he had only taken 2 steps when he suddenly heard a cry in front of him. Lu Chen was startled and looked up. He saw that Exian was running too fast and didn't see the road clearly. Just as she entered the forest, she tripped on a shrub branch and fell on her back. The puppy was also thrown out and landed in the grass with a plop sound. Immediately, wails and cries of alarm rose and fell one after another. Lu Chen sighed helplessly and looked up at the sky. Then he walked over to help Exian up. Exian's face was red and she did not dare to look at him. She lowered her head and patted the dust off her body. Then she ran over to pick up the puppy, who knew that when she moved, Lu Chen pulled her to the side. Exian panicked and said, "Don't stop me, I want to save." "Shut up." Lu Chen stopped her in a bad mood and walked over to pick up the puppy. He glared at Exian and said, "Don't talk nonsense, let's go." Exian said embarrassedly, "You." Lu Chen snorted and ignored her. He grabbed the puppy and walked forward. At the same time he said, "I spent a lot of effort to fix your hand. Don't break it again for no reason. So troublesome." Exian's mouth opened. Looking at the man's back, the corner of her mouth suddenly curled up, revealing a happy smile. "Hey, why are you in a daze?" Lu Chen, who was in front, turned back and shouted. Exian jumped in fright. She quickly chased after him while saying, "Coming, coming." She ran behind Lu Chen like a wisp of smoke, closely following him as they walked out of the forest. Chapter 69. The 2 of them walked all the way out of the forest and returned to the river valley. Under the sunlight, the bloodthirsty demon flowers were still incomparably gorgeous, and the yellow leopard that had been dragged over not long ago had long disappeared, leaving only a bloodstain on the ground. Lu Chen and Exian walked directly out of the river valley. No matter what, with such a large field of bloodthirsty demon flowers growing here, it was really not a pleasant place to be. After walking out of the river valley, Lu Chen found a flat and safe place by the river. He first put down the little dog in his hand, then called Exian over and examined her injured arm. In the end he nodded and said, "It's good, the bones are not crooked." As he spoke, he looked as if he had been relieved of a heavy burden, but it was unknown whether he was worried about Exian or remembering the results of his previous treatment for her. After saying this, Lu Chen walked to the side, minding his own business. Exian glanced at him and wanted to say something, but then she immediately swallowed her words. She then walked with some difficulty to the little black dog and sat down next to it. The little black dog raised its head and glanced at her. Speaking of which, it was strange. Even though this little dog's entire body was covered in scars, it stank to the heavens, and its fur was dirty to the point it was knotted together, making it extremely unsightly. Only its eyes were still bright and clear. Perhaps that was the only beautiful thing on its body. Exian sighed and said in a low voice, "I'll help you, don't bite me." The little black dog looked at her for a while, then barked, but it was unknown whether it agreed or not. Exian searched her bosom for a while, and after a while, took out a silk handkerchief. Then with some difficulty, she used her remaining uninjured hand to use the silk handkerchief to wipe the dust off the little black dog's body, as well as the shocking wounds. Perhaps it felt the kindness of the young woman in front of it, but the little black dog did not avoid or struggle, and actually obediently lay on the ground, not moving at all. In the distance, Lu Chen glanced over. His expression still indifferent, and no change could be seen. However, Xian's movements looked a little clumsy, and it was obvious that she had never done such a thing before. In addition, the little black dog's injuries were too many and too heavy, so after a few tries, she accidentally touched the little black dog's wounds, immediately causing its body to tremble and let out a cry. Xian's hands suddenly trembled, and she hurriedly said in a soft voice, I'm sorry, I'll be gentle. Woof 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 woof. Before her voice died away, the little black dog let out another cry. It turned out that Xian had just avoided a wound, and then pressed on another wound, causing the little black dog to tremble in pain. This happened a few times in a row, on the originally calm and peaceful riverside. Only the dog's barking could be heard, mournful and painful with a bit of helplessness. The young woman's forehead was covered in sweat, and her only hand kept waving the silk handkerchief, and every movement was a little stiff. In the end, she did not even dare to press down again, and her pair of eyes flickered with tears, looking like she was about to cry. Hey! A familiar voice rang out behind her. Xian shivered, and looked back, only to see that Lu Chen had walked behind her, and stood there with a helpless expression on his face. He used his hand to gently pat his forehead and said, Get out of the way. Xian was stunned for a moment and said, What are you doing? Lu Chen glared at her unhappily and said, Although I didn't want to save this dog in the beginning, but I can't just watch you make it suffer to death here. Xian was speechless, and her face was red as if it was about to catch fire. She hurriedly took a step back, and at the same time, she muttered in a low voice, I didn't mean to. Lu Chen did not pay attention to her at all, and squatted down to look at the little black dog, and then looked at the injuries on its body, and finally touched the broken leg, and his eyebrows slowly wrinkled. Xian had been watching him carefully, and seeing his serious expression, her heart could not help but sink, and she hurriedly asked, Brother Lu, how is it? Is the little dog okay? Lu Chen did not answer her question, and only pondered for a moment, and then glanced at the little dog, and said lightly, If you want to live, be obedient. Facing Lu Chen, the little black dog was obviously much more nervous than before, and its whole body looked a little stiff, and then it softly whimpered a few times, and it was unknown whether it understood Lu Chen's words. Lu Chen turned his hand, and the black dagger appeared in his hand again, and then directly turned his hand over to cut the little black dog. Xian, who was standing to the side, cried out in alarm, and her body involuntarily took a step forward. The little black dog also suddenly barked, and it looked like it was scared out of its wits, and there was a look of despair in its eyes as it lay on the ground. But after a moment, suddenly, a piece of black fur was seen floating in the air, and then slowly falling down. It turned out that Lu Chen had swung his sword to scrape off a piece of fur on the little dog's body, and then they saw him move the sword as if it was flying, one slash after another, and actually began to shave the little dog's fur. In the midst of this, because of all kinds of tangled fur, and because it was riddled with wounds, it could not avoid touching the little black dog's wounds, and the little dog was in so much pain that it cried out, but the expression on Lu Chen's face did not change. And as if frightened by the sharp murderous aura of the black dagger, although the little dog cried out in pain, it still forced its body to lie on the ground, and did not dare to move at all. Not long after, fur was scattered on the ground, and the little dog from head to toe, all the fur on its body was shaved. The original little black dog had become a little bald dog, and its body was completely bare, and it was really ugly and comical. But it also made it more clear that the little dog's body was densely covered with wounds, and it was a ghastly sight. After finishing the shave, Lu Chen did not stop. First, he swept over all the little dog's wounds, ignoring the old wounds that had already formed scabs, and first sprinkled some medicinal powder on the new wounds, and then used cloth to bandage them. Then he went to the wounds that had already rotted, and after a pause, he stretched out his hand to press the little dog's body, and then glanced at the little dog, and said calmly, Bear with it. The bald little dog stared blankly at Lu Chen, and then looked at the black dagger in his hand, and its body violently convulsed and trembled. Under the horrified gaze of Xian, Lu Chen directly swung the dagger down, and the sword cut into the little dog's rotting wounds, and then with a twist of the blade, the rotten flesh was directly cut off, and he flung it to the side. The little dog let out an incomparably shrill cry, as if its heart and lungs were being torn apart, and its whole body trembled incessantly. But what was surprising was that although it looked like it was in extreme pain, it really was lying on the ground, not moving. This puppy was actually enduring the pain with great difficulty. Lu Chen also seemed to be a little surprised, and he tilted his head to look at it, a faint trace of admiration in his eyes. Chapter 70. Although he was surprised by the black puppy's endurance, Lu Chen's hands did not stop. The black sword danced around the puppy's body, and not long after, 3 pieces of rotten flesh were cut off from the puppy's body. Fresh blood flowed all over the ground. Then, Lu Chen skillfully took out some strange medicinal powder and sprinkled it on the puppy's wounds. The bleeding quickly stopped, and he used a white cloth to bandage the puppy's wounds. After that, the puppy looked like it was on the verge of death. It had no strength left, and could only rest its head on the ground, gasping for air. On the other hand, Xiaofan, who was standing at the side, was horrified, and her face seemed to be slightly pale. However, after seeing that the wounds were bandaged with white cloth, Xiaofan heaved a sigh of relief and said softly, "Thank you, Brother Lu." Lu Chen looked at her and said, "It's not over yet." Xiaofan was shocked and said, "What else?" Lu Chen silently turned his head, as if he had nothing to say. He just pointed at the puppy's hind leg. There was a broken leg there. Xiaofan was speechless, and did not know what to say. Fortunately, Lu Chen did not say much. He walked to the side and chopped a wooden stick, just like how he treated Xiaofan this morning. Taking advantage of this gap, Xiaofan squatted beside the puppy and said softly, "Puppy, don't be afraid. Brother Lu is very powerful. He will heal all your wounds. This leg is different from your hand." Lu Chen's voice rang in her ear. Xiaofan looked up and saw Lu Chen squatting down again with a wooden stick. He said calmly, "Although your hand is broken, it was reattached quickly and there is medicine. If there are no accidents, it will recover in 1 or 2 months. However, this puppy's leg is different. It has been broken for too long." What will happen to it?" Xiaofan asked anxiously. Lu Chen thought for a while and said, "It can probably be reattached, but it definitely won't recover. The best-case scenario is that it will become a lame dog." "Lame dog?" Xiaofan muttered blankly. She didn't know what to say. On the other side, Lu Chen had already grabbed the broken dog's leg. First, he checked the wound, then he cleaned it carefully. He carefully aligned the bones and applied some medicinal powder. Finally, he used a strip of white cloth to tie the dog's leg tightly to the wooden stick. At this point, the plan to save the dog had finally come to an end. Looking at it now, not only was the original black puppy bald, its body was also covered with white strips of cloth, and a wooden stick was tied to its hind leg. It was as comical as one could imagine, but compared to the tragic scene in the barbarian's cave, it was much better. After such a torment, they were delayed for a long time. The 2 of them did not travel far that day. In the end, they only walked for a few miles from the river valley before the sky darkened. As usual, it was not allowed to light a fire in the night in the disordered land. Lu Chen and Xiaofan did not stay in the open space near the riverbank. According to Lu Chen, when night came, it was very likely that some monsters would come to the riverbank to drink water. At that time, staying there would only lead to death. Xiaofan naturally listened to Lu Chen. Thus, the 2 of them found a tall tree and climbed up, bringing along the dog. When the sky was completely dark, Xiaofan leaned against the tree trunk and hugged the wrapped-up dog in her arms. She comforted it softly, looking like she was comforting a child. Her voice was slow and gentle, like the whispers of the forest, but also like a warm spring breeze. "Don't be afraid. We've already saved you, so of course we won't abandon you. At least we'll wait until you've recovered. When that time comes, I'll let you go. Even if you let it go, it will still die," Lu Chen, who was sitting on the other side of the tree, suddenly said. Xiaofan was a little surprised. "Why?" Lu Chen raised his head and looked at the gloomy and dark night sky. After a moment of silence he said, "Didn't you ask me earlier why this kind of dog doesn't need to be saved?" "Yes. This dog is a mixed breed. Its bloodline comes from 2 kinds of monsters, the snow wolf and the black jackal. The snow wolf was a proud and powerful high-grade demon beast. It had always lived alone. When the male snow wolf is in heat, it will casually rape the weak black jackal because it can't find a mate. However, it will never care about its offspring. The black jackal, on the other hand, is naturally fierce and autistic. It especially values the purity of the dog's bloodline. Once a mixed breed like this appears in front of the black jackal, it will be attacked by all the black jackals and directly torn to pieces. This is also the reason why these mixed breeds almost never grow up. Almost all dogs are bitten to death as soon as they are born. Exian silently lowered her head. The puppy in her arms softly whimpered. No one knew if it was complaining about its tragic fate. Why this unlucky puppy was not bitten to death when it was born and why it fell into the hands of the old barbarian to be tortured. These things were naturally untraceable now. However, the following days were considered peaceful. Lu Chen led Exian and the puppy forward in the disorienting lands. They did not encounter any major problems along the way. About 5 days later, they finally returned to the Leaping Tiger Gorge. Thinking about it, it was as if they had gone around in a circle and came back. However, there were 4 of them when they entered the disorienting lands, but only 2 were left. This inevitably made Exian feel a little sad. On the contrary, in these 5 days, the unlucky puppy seemed to have a cheap life. Its heavy injuries actually healed very quickly. After a few days, it was able to run around on the ground. However, just as Lu Chen had said before, this puppy's leg was forever lame. When it ran, it would limp, making it look very awkward and ugly. Strangely enough, after this puppy was able to move around freely, Lu Chen and Exian did not hold on to it. However, the puppy obediently followed them and never showed any signs of sneaking away. It just followed them all the way. As they entered the Leaping Tiger Gorge, Lu Chen glanced at the puppy. Seeing that it was very curious as it limped back and forth, looking at the surrounding scenery, Lu Chen could not be bothered with it. Instead, he said to Exian, "After this, we will be considered to have left the disorienting lands. Let's go our separate ways here." Exian's footsteps paused for a moment. After a moment of hesitation, she looked at Lu Chen with a sincere expression of gratitude. She said, "Brother Lu, I really thank you." Lu Chen smiled and said, "Don't mention it. It was nothing." Exian shook her head and sighed. "It's not like that. I know that I am a very stupid person and caused you a lot of trouble along the way. Brother Lu, I won't say anything else. If there is a chance in the future, come find me at Kunlun Mountain. I will definitely." Huh! Lu Chen was stunned. He stopped in his tracks and looked at Exian with a shocked expression. "What? You are a disciple of the Kunlun party?" Chapter 71. Exian blushed and said, "Well, I'm not really one yet, but I should be one after a while." Lu Chen became curious and asked a few more questions. As it turned out, although Exian looked delicate, she was actually a woman with an impressive background. She was born in Kunwu City, at the foot of the Kunlun Mountains. She was the daughter of a member of the E clan. The E clan had a close relationship with the Kunlun party for many years. Over the years, many of their disciples had entered the Kunlun party. When Exian was young, a powerful golden core cultivator had taken a fancy to this girl's potential. He had contacted the E family in advance and was prepared to take her in as a disciple. However, something unexpected happened to Jean Dan Fryer and he was seriously injured. He was forced to go into seclusion for 10 years, which delayed Exian's acceptance as a disciple. However, this matter was known to the Kunlun party and the E clan did not conceal it. Therefore, almost everyone in the Kunlun Mountains regarded Exian as a disciple of the Kunlun sect. The 2 people who came with Exian this time were also official disciples of the Kunlun party. When they accepted the task of gathering the dusk fog flower, they brought Exian with them. Firstly, it was to show their closeness. Secondly, it was also to curry favor with Jean Dan Fryer, who was rumored to be recovering from his injuries and coming out of seclusion. Once that powerful person came out of seclusion, it wouldn't be long before Exian officially entered the Kunlun party. "Congratulations, congratulations," Lu Chen said to Exian with a smile. Exian smiled and nodded. Looking at Lu Chen, she felt that this man's smile was gentle and his face was calm. He looked harmless, but he didn't have the cold murderous aura that he occasionally displayed in the land of chaos. For a moment, Exian was even in a trance. She felt that when she looked at Lu Chen, she was hallucinating. One was a man standing in the light with a gentle smile. The other was a cold and murderous demon hiding in the dark. However, this kind of thinking was a bit ridiculous. Exian shook her head to get rid of this boring thought and said goodbye to Lu Chen. Then she waved at the dog standing next to her and said with a smile, "Atsu, come here, I'll take you home." Atsu was the name they gave to the dog. Originally, Lu Chen had given the dog even more random and unpleasant names, such as Hei Wang, Hua, Baldy. In his words, the dog would run away sooner or later anyway, so there was no need to bother giving it a good name. Finally, when Xian saw that the dog was pitiful, she mustered up the courage to speak up for justice and argued for this unlucky dog. After refuting these unpleasant names one by one, the two reluctantly came up with a homonym for Baldy, and simply called it Atsu. Although it sounded rustic, it was at least down to earth and not particularly unpleasant. Although it still felt a little like calling a peasant dog, looking at Atsu's current appearance, not only was it bald, it was also wrapped in a lot of cloth strips. Coupled with that limping leg, it really didn't look good. It might not even be as good as a real peasant dog. So a peasant dog. So be it. That was probably what Xian thought helplessly at the time. However, ever since they left the river valley in the land of chaos, Xian had grown to like Atsu a little. Speaking of which, she grew up in the family, so her living conditions were naturally excellent. However, due to her strict upbringing, she had never raised a cat or a dog. Now, she really liked Atsu, which had been rather obedient these few days. Lu Chen stood at the side and looked at Xian in surprise. "You're taking it home to raise?" "Yes," Xian said happily. "Atsu is also very pitiful. Look at how badly it's injured." Lu Chen glanced at Atsu, who was standing not too far away from his feet. When he first found him, he was indeed severely injured. However, this dog had the bloodline of a demonic beast, so his recovery ability was astonishing. In just a few days, the wounds on his body had healed a lot, especially the injury on his broken leg. Although he couldn't change the fact that he was lame, he could still run after throwing away the wooden stick. In comparison, the wooden stick in Xian's hand was still there. Lu Chen shrugged and said, "If you want to raise it, then raise it. Up to you. Atsu, come here." Xian waved at the puppy with a smile on her face. Atsu obediently wagged its tail and ran to her feet. Xian squatted down and touched Atsu's bald head with a doting look on her face. "Atsu, say goodbye to Brother Lu. We're going home." Atsu tilted its head and looked at Xian with a pair of unusually bright eyes. Then it barked twice. Xian laughed. She pointed at Lu Chen and said, "We're saying goodbye to Brother Lu. We're leaving soon." Atsu blinked its eyes. It looked at Xian, then looked back at Lu Chen. Then, it barked at Xian again. Then, it turned around and ran to Lu Chen's side, lying down. Ha! Lu Chen and Xian were stunned at the same time. It didn't look like it was going to say goodbye. After a while, Lu Chen suddenly frowned as if he thought of something. On the other side, Xian ran over and reached out to hug Atsu. At the same time she said, "Atsu, are you stupid? I mean..." Before she finished speaking, the puppy shrank back and avoided Xian's arm. Then, it hid behind Lu Chen. This time, the meaning of Atsu couldn't be clearer. Xian also stood up in shock. After a while, she suddenly felt a little embarrassed and said angrily, "Hey! Stinky Atsu, are you kidding me? These days, I'm the one who fed you, hugged you when you slept, and played with you normally. But now, you choose Brother Lu and not me?" Atsu's bald head poked out from behind Lu Chen's calf. It looked a little sneaky. Then, it barked twice, as if admitting to it. Lu Chen rolled his eyes. Atsu rubbed its head against his leg and wagged its tail like a windmill. It looked like it was trying to flatter him. Xian rubbed her forehead with her hand. Then she pointed at Atsu and said, You. Lu Chen coughed and said, I can roughly guess the reason." "What is it?" Xian immediately asked. For millions of years, the chaotic lands has always been a dangerous world where the strong prey on the weak. The countless creatures here, including demonic beasts of all sizes, have long gotten used to this set of rules. So, when they are still small and weak, if they have a choice, all demonic beasts will follow their innate instincts and attach themselves to the stronger side. Lu Chen looked at Xian and smiled. He didn't finish his sentence. Xian stood rooted to the ground. Her pretty face was a little red. After a while she said hatefully, "Damn it, even a little bastard like you is looking down on me." Chapter 72. Atsu looked at Exine with some affection in its eyes, but it still refused to come out from behind Lu Chen. It seemed that it was determined to follow Lu Chen. Lu Chen also sighed and said to Atsu, "Hey, stupid dog, let me tell you, if you follow her, you can live a good life without worrying about food and drink. That is a happy life. If you follow me, you won't have a good life. Maybe you will die in the wilderness at any time." That's right, that's right. Exine repeated, looking at Atsu eagerly. This time, Atsu didn't even look at Exine, it just looked at Lu Chen and wagged its tail desperately. You stupid dog. Exine was so angry that she couldn't speak, but she was also a little reluctant to leave Atsu. Her eyes were a little red. In the following period of time, 2 people and a dog spent almost half a cup of tea's time at the exit of the Leaping Tiger Gorge. However, no matter how much Exine tried to persuade him, Atsu was still indifferent. In the end, Exine finally gave up. She had no choice but to say goodbye to Lu Chen. Before she left, she sighed and said to Lu Chen, "Brother Lu, from now on, Atsu is in your hands, you must. When I am hungry, I will kill it and stew it." Lu Chen said to Exine very calmly. Exine was stunned. After a while she stammered, What did you say?" Lu Chen said matter-of-factly, "I didn't want to keep a dog. Even when I saved it that day, you insisted. I didn't ask it to follow me. If this dog insists, I can stew it and eat it. It doesn't seem to be a problem." "Something's wrong," Exine almost shouted. Then she put on a sad face and said, "Brother Lu, Atsu is so pitiful. Don't eat it, just let it go." Lu Chen looked at her appearance and couldn't help but laugh for a moment. There was an inexplicable warmth in his heart. Exine was still young and seemed to have been spoiled since childhood. She was indeed very pure. However, he didn't know why her family would allow such an inexperienced girl like her to come to such a dangerous place like the Land of Chaos. Lu Chen was startled. He frowned and looked at Exine from head to toe. Being stared at like this, Exine suddenly felt guilty. She took a step back and said, "Brother Lu, what's wrong?" Lu Chen snorted and said, "Don't tell me you snuck out without telling your family?" Exine was speechless. Her beautiful face flushed red. Looking at her, the answer was obvious. Lu Chen shook his head and said, "Forget it, it's none of my business. But we all know each other. You should be more careful in the future and don't run around." Exine lowered her head. Her eyes reddened as if she had thought of something. "I know. I will definitely apologize to my parents when I get back. And I even implicated Senior Uncle Han and Senior Brother He. If it wasn't for me, they—" "Hey!" Lu Chen suddenly interrupted her and frowned. "What nonsense are you talking about? What does their death have to do with you?" Exine bit her lip and said, "My cultivation is low. When the black jackals surrounded us, I couldn't help them, so—" "Nonsense!" Lu Chen snorted with disdain, and he looked at the young woman as if he was looking at an idiot. "Are you stupid? This has nothing to do with you. It was your first time coming to the chaotic lands. Han Nanzu and He Gang are proper disciples of Kunlun. They have cultivation and experience. Isn't it natural for them to take care of you? Wasn't it their fault that we ended up in that situation?" He sneered and said, "Not to mention the fact that I reminded them several times before I left that day. It's fine if you're young and insensible, but those 2 men were actually blinded by greed. They deserved to die. Instead they dragged you down. Do you understand?" Exine was at a loss. After a while she said with uncertainty, "Is that so?" Lu Chen said, "Of course it is so. Exine, I'm telling you, it's a good thing that you're kind-hearted, but if you can't tell right from wrong and blame yourself for everything you see, then you're not kind-hearted." Exine lowered her head and blushed. She glanced at him from the corner of her eye and asked guiltily, What is that?" Lu Chen said angrily, "That is called being stupid." Everything that needed to be said had finally been said. The dog that needed to go was stubbornly refusing to leave. Exine, who could not do anything about Atsu, finally waved goodbye to Lu Chen and the dog. Before they parted, she repeatedly exhorted Lu Chen and begged him for 2 things. First, he must not eat Atsu. He is very obedient and honest, and he is fated to be with us. If he eats him, there might be retribution. Second, Big Brother Lu, if you have the chance in the future, You must come to Kunlun Mountain to find me, okay? It is too dangerous to be a guide in the land of chaos. Why don't I beg my parents and master to help you find a job as a Kunlun party's odd job disciple? It is safe and comfortable, and you will be respected when you go out. Also, don't forget to bring Atsu to find me. I know. Even though Lu Chen was experienced, he could not stand the girl's long-winded pleading. He said, I will not eat this dog. At most, I will ignore it. It is getting late. You should be on your way. Woof woof, woof 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 woof. Atsu lay at Lu Chen's feet and barked at Exian. Exian nodded. She was a little reluctant to part with Atsu. She had not seen much of the world. This time, she had stayed with Lu Chen and Atsu for so many days, so she had some feelings for them. She looked back with every step and waved her hand every 2 steps. She slowly left Lu Chen and walked forward. Lu Chen and Atsu looked at her together, and then gradually, the look in the eyes of the man and dog became a little strange. They must be a little reluctant to part with me, Exian thought. She felt a little warm, but also a little shy. Her footsteps became slower. But at this moment, she suddenly heard Lu Chen's somewhat exasperated voice from behind her. Hey! What? Exian suddenly turned around and looked at Lu Chen. You are walking in the opposite direction. Exian suddenly froze on the spot as if she had been petrified. She looked around with difficulty and found that she had walked into the leaping tiger gorge again. A moment later, she suddenly let out a soft cry and covered her eyes with her hands. She didn't dare to look at Lu Chen and Atsu again. She turned around and ran away with large strides, disappearing into the distance like a wisp of smoke. Vaguely, it seemed that Lu Chen's voice came from behind the dust. It seemed that he was talking to the dog beside him. Atsu, I can't believe there is someone more stupid than you. Woof 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 woof. Atsu barked again and again. It seemed to be very dissatisfied. Chapter 73. Autumn had passed unknowingly, and the Crescent City outside the Land of Chaos had also entered winter. Compared to the legendary Great Ice Sea of the north that could freeze people into ice cubes, the winter here was not considered difficult. At most, one would need to add 1 or 2 layers of clothing. If a cultivator was strong enough, even this could be waived. Lu Chen walked leisurely in the Crescent City, and not far behind him, a limping black puppy was following closely. Although he had warned Exian sternly when they parted, Lu Chen did not really slaughter Atsu in the end. The current Atsu was completely different from when he was found in the Land of Chaos. The shaved hair on its body had grown back, and it was no longer that ugly bald dog. And at this moment, Atsu's body was a size bigger than before. Its black fur was glossy, and its movements were relaxed and agile. Its pair of dog eyes were bright and intelligent, and it looked very lively. It was as if its entire body had become a different dog. Probably only its lame leg still stubbornly recorded its painful past. After passing a street corner, in front of him was the busiest market in the Crescent City. People came and went, and the noise was like waves of water. Lu Chen looked left and right, and continued to walk forward without a change in expression. Behind him, Atsu looked around, and suddenly burrowed into the crowd, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Lu Chen casually looked back, and his expression was indifferent as if he did not care. He just continued to walk forward, and not long after, he walked to the busiest place in the market. Suddenly, he saw a group of people gathered in front of the bulletin board on the street, whispering and discussing, as if they had seen something surprising. Lu Chen's curiosity was piqued, and he also walked over. He squeezed into the crowd and looked at the bulletin board. He saw that on top of the layers of old paper, there was indeed a new piece of yellow paper, and a few lines of words were written on it. Arrest the great thief Blue Butterfly. This monster is greedy, lustful, and extremely vicious. He has committed countless evil deeds, murder, arson, rape, and pillage, and has caused great harm to the world. Recently, it has been rumored that he has fled to the Land of Chaos. Along the way, cultivators are hunting him down, and anyone who captures this monster will be rewarded with 5,000 spirit stones. The last signature was impressively the famous Zhengxian Meng. The surrounding passers-by were discussing. Some people expressed anger and disdain for Blue Butterfly's many evil deeds, while others lamented that since Zhengxian Meng had appeared, there was no place for this monster in the world. It was no wonder that he could only run to the most dangerous and chaotic land of chaos, where Zhengxianmeng's power was the weakest. Lu Chen stood in front of the notice board and looked at it for a while. His expression became slightly strange. After a while, he suddenly sighed and cursed to himself in a low voice. What a bitch! Lu Chen turned away from the notice board and walked out of the market. When he was halfway there, he saw a black shadow flash beside him. It was the black dog. He didn't know where it came from, but it was holding a bone in its mouth. There wasn't much meat on it, so Lu Chen didn't know where it found it. When Atsu saw Lu Chen, it came over and wagged its tail at him affectionately. Then, it placed the bone at Lu Chen's feet. Lu Chen rolled his eyes and said, Atsu, I've told you many times, I don't eat this. Atsu didn't seem to understand Lu Chen's words, but he looked very happy and barked at Lu Chen twice. Lu Chen shook his head and reached out to touch Atsu's head. Then, he continued to walk forward. When Atsu saw this, it quickly picked up the bone on the ground and chewed on it along the way, following Lu Chen. When the man and the dog walked out of the Crescent City gate, the bone in Atsu's mouth was already gone. After leaving the city, Lu Chen brought Atsu all the way south. Unknowingly, they walked to the familiar Leaping Tiger Gorge. However, this time, Lu Chen didn't enter the gorge. Instead, he looked up at the Dragon Mountain and Tiger Mountain. After pondering for a moment, he turned to the side and walked into the dense forest. He followed the mountain and went up the Dragon Mountain. Legend had it that there were dragons on the Dragon Mountain a long time ago. However, this legend was just like the Dragon Lake on the Tea Mountain in Qingshutang village. The ancestors just casually talked about it, and the descendants just listened to it. The forest on the Dragon Mountain was dense, and there were almost no roads to follow. It could be seen that almost no one came to the mountain. Lu Chen and Atsu climbed from the foot of the mountain for almost an hour, but they still hadn't walked out of the forest. However, they saw a small hill with 3 or 4 rocks exposed on the ground. The surface of the rocks was mottled and covered with moss. Lu Chen looked in that direction for a while, then raised his head to look at the color of the sky. He then walked around the rocks and came to a place that was several zhang higher. He crouched down under a tree root that allowed him to see the rocks below. Atsu wagged its tail and walked to Lu Chen's side. There was some doubt in its bright eyes. Lu Chen smiled at it, then put his hand to his mouth and gestured for it to keep quiet. Atsu tilted its head, and its 2 dog ears lowered slightly. After a while, it actually laid down beside Lu Chen. The forest was very quiet. From time to time, there were crisp bird cries coming from the branches and leaves above their heads, making the forest seem even more quiet. And in a place further away, there were occasional roars of beasts, but they couldn't tell what kind of beasts it was. Lu Chen had been lying on the ground, motionless for a long time. His eyes were calm, and most of the time, he was staring at the rocks below. It was just that nothing had changed after such a long time. The waiting was a little frustrating, and Atsu couldn't help but move from time to time. Sometimes, he would use his claws to pat the fallen leaves beneath him, and sometimes he would rub his head against Lu Chen's body. Most of the time, he would use his nose to sniff around. They waited and waited, and the light in the forest gradually dimmed. The day seemed to be coming to an end. Atsu seemed to be a little bored. It opened its mouth and yawned, but Lu Chen was unusually patient. Looking at him, it seemed that he still wanted to wait. Night was coming, and the forest became dark. Lu Chen slowly propped himself up and carefully looked around. When the corner of his eyes swept to his side, he was suddenly startled. He discovered that in this pitch-black place Atsu, who was lying beside him, had a pair of eyes that slowly brightened in the darkness. A faint green luster appeared, like a ball of dark green fire, quietly burning in the silent darkness. Lu Chen reached over, hugged Atsu's head, and touched it. Atsu made a low whine, as if it was responding to something. Then, Lu Chen let go of his hand, stood up, and slowly walked down. The forest was dark, and he couldn't even see his fingers in front of him. But he seemed to be able to see things in the dark, and his steps were extremely accurate and steady. Not long after, he walked to the side of the rocks. He squatted down, put one hand on the edge of the largest rock, and gently touched the bottom of the rock with the other. The moist moss exuded water vapor, and his fingers were wet. In the darkness, Lu Chen fumbled for a moment, and then found something from the dark gap under the rock. He put it in his arms, turned around, and left. Chapter 74. The darkness obscured the movements of all the figures. Only a pair of eyes that were like eerie flames flickered faintly in the forest. It was a rather terrifying sight to behold. Especially when Lu Chen walked back, that pair of ghostly flames suddenly pounced over, causing one's heart to tremble. Lu Chen stretched out a hand to block Atu's head, which was wagging its tail in the dark. "You don't look like that usually, but you're pretty scary at night, you stupid dog." Lu Chen snorted. "Woof, woof, woof." Atsu barked twice in a low voice, as if it was proud of itself. It was not ashamed, but proud. Lu Chen shook his head helplessly and said, "Let's go." Under the cover of the night, the figures of a man and a dog quietly left in the darkness, like ghosts in the lonely mountains. After descending the Dragon Mountain, it was still late at night outside. Lu Chen did not immediately rush back to the Crescent City. In fact, at this time, the Crescent City had already closed its doors. If he did not have the ability to fly, even if he returned, he would not be able to enter the city. Lu Chen brought Atsu to a secluded place far away from the Dragon Mountain, and then took out something from his bosom. It was the item that he had taken out from the cracks in the rocks in the forest. At this moment, with the help of the faint starlight in the sky, he saw that it was a sealed letter. Yellow bast paper, red wax seal. Other than that, there were no marks or words on the envelope. Lu Chen silently looked at the envelope in his hand. After a moment, he expressionlessly tore open the seal, took out a piece of paper, and started reading. Of course, there were words on the letter, but there were only a few lines. Lu Chen quickly finished reading it. When he saw the last sentence of the letter, his face, which had always been calm, suddenly changed. It was a very strange change. It was not anger, nor was it joy. It was like a kind of memory. All kinds of emotions surged into his heart in an instant. They flashed across his eyes. At that moment, his expression was so complicated. But in the end, everything returned to silence. Phew! A sudden soft sound startled Atsu, who was lying next to Lu Chen. When he turned his head, he saw Lu Chen lighting up a small match in his hand. Then, he lit up the letter together with the envelope. The flames quickly swept up and engulfed the letter. The light of the fire illuminated Lu Chen's face in the darkness and was reflected in the depths of his eyes. After a while, he sighed softly and said in a low voice, "The ghost won't go away." Lu Chen woke up when the first ray of sunlight shone from the horizon. Without any hesitation, he led Atsu to the south. When the leaping tiger gorge appeared in front of him, Lu Chen did not hesitate at all. He strode forward and re-entered the land of chaos. Atsu, the black dog, did not seem to have much resistance to returning to the old place. Instead, it seemed to be very excited about this vast mountain world. It ran and jumped around in front of and behind Lu Chen. It sniffed everywhere with its nose and found a few towering trees to pee on. However, no matter what, Atsu would not be too far away from Lu Chen. In fact, it followed Lu Chen even more closely than when it was in Crescent City. It almost never left Lu Chen's sight. One man and one dog walked all the way. The route they took was actually the same as the route that Lu Chen took to the Black Armor Mountain with Xiaofan and the others. Therefore, on the second day, Lu Chen and Atsu once again stood at the fork in the road near the Black Armor Mountain. Atu stuck out its tongue and squatted on the ground, looking left and right. Its expression was relatively calm, and it didn't seem to be excited about returning home. Or perhaps this stupid dog didn't even remember that a place not far from here might be its home. Lu Chen glanced at the Black Armor Mountain in the distance, and walked in another direction with an indifferent expression. That direction led to the deeper part of the land of chaos. In that direction, there was a past that was buried in the passage of time. It was full of blood, hatred, and betrayal. There was a deserted valley there. On the sixth day, Lu Chen and Atsu arrived at the deserted valley. The dangers and difficulties they encountered on the way were far greater than what they had experienced in the Black Armor Mountain. The demonic beasts on the way also rapidly became stronger. Especially the closer they were to the deserted valley, the more dangerous the demonic beasts became. Even the invisible signs of the spiritual power of the five elements became much more intense. Fortunately, Lu Chen seemed to be particularly good at this kind of dangerous thing. After many times avoiding the ferocious demonic beasts and many strange dangers, he and Atsu finally arrived at the outside of the valley. The deserted valley was a steep valley surrounded by mountains. There was only a narrow passage connecting it to the outside world. Since ancient times, there had been a strange power in the deserted valley, which made it impossible for all living creatures to live in it. That was why it was called the Deserted Valley. 10 years ago, there were remnants of the divine sect of the Three Realms doing evil in this place. However, they were detected in advance by the righteous Zhengxian Meng, who sent an army to surround and annihilate them. The evildoers were wiped out, and the world was cleansed. It was said that the battle was earth-shattering, the wind and clouds changed color, the mountains shook, and the evildoers of the devil sect suffered heavy casualties. However, after the battle, this place was filled with evil spirits. Ordinary cultivators with weak cultivation couldn't get close to it. It was said that it was caused by a curse cast by the great cultivator of the devil sect before he died. Anyway, this valley was originally deserted, so after a long time, no one came here. When Lu Chen walked on the narrow mountain path, he looked at the somewhat familiar mountainous terrain around him. There was a trace of complexity in his eyes. However, when he walked to the entrance of the deserted valley, he suddenly stopped. In his memory, there was a figure standing on the small hill next to the mountain path. The mountain breeze blew past, the clothes fluttered. Lu Chen was in a trance for a moment. It was as if he saw a handsome man in white. But that illusion disappeared in a blink of an eye. What reflected in his eyes was a fatty standing against the wind. "Hey!" That fatty stood on a high place, waved at Lu Chen with a laugh and shouted, "Long time no see." Lu Chen's mouth twitched, looked at the stupidly fat old ma jumping down from the small hill. He sneered and said, "Why are you not dead yet?" Old ma sternly said, "This is not right of you. We have known each other for a while. We have been neighbors in the same village for 10 years. You come up and ask me if I am dead or not. Can we still be friends?" Lu Chen spat and said, "If we are friends then don't come and bother me." Old Ma shrugged and said with a bitter smile, "If it was me, of course I wouldn't come and find you. Isn't it because I have no choice?" Lu Chen was startled. Suddenly his face changed slightly and said, "You mean?" Old Ma glanced at the valley behind him and said in a low voice, "He is also here." The corner of Lu Chen's eyes twitched slightly. There was a trace of complicated glimmer in the depths of his eyes. He stood there in silence. Old Ma looked at his expression. He wanted to say something but stopped. In the end, he sighed softly and patted Lu Chen's shoulder. He said, "Go in, he wants to see you." Lu Chen lowered his head slightly and didn't say another word. After a long period of silence, he finally strode forward and slowly walked into the desolate valley that had been uninhabited for a long time. The towering precipice was like a sharp sword that pierced through the sky, blocking out the sun and leaving only a shadow on the earth. Just like that, Lu Chen once again walked into the shadow without a sound, gradually disappearing. Chapter 75. It was supposed to be a sunny day, but as soon as they entered the desolate valley, they saw that the ring-shaped sky formed by the huge mountains above their heads was filled with dark clouds. The dark clouds were thick and low, causing one's heart to feel oppressed. Lu Chen's eyes swept across the gloomy and dark valley. Everywhere he looked, there was not even a blade of grass growing. It was either hard, towering cliffs or weathered, cracked earth. Gusts of cold wind blew from the depths of the valley, stirring up clouds of gray dust. Further away, because the wind blew through the cracks in the weathered rocks, there was a constant shrill howl. It sounded like the souls of the dead who died here a long time ago were still howling with resentment. The little black dog followed Lu Chen's footsteps into the desolate valley. Although as a monster, it instinctively disliked this lifeless place. Its desire to be with Lu Chen suppressed this feeling. However, when it walked into the valley, especially after following Lu Chen for a distance of about 10 feet, Atsu suddenly stopped. It groaned in a low voice, and its face seemed to be in pain. Its whole body was trembling slightly, as if it was feeling very uncomfortable. However, after glancing at Lu Chen in front of it, Atsu hesitated for a moment, but it still insisted on walking forward. But soon, something even worse happened. After only a few steps, Atsu's footing became unstable. Its body swayed, and after every 2 steps it took, it would lose its balance. Not long after, it fell to the ground with a thud, and all 4 of its legs began to twitch. A shadow suddenly blocked its sight. Atsu groaned in a low voice and looked up, only to see that Lu Chen had returned to its side. After reaching out and gently touching Atsu's head, Lu Chen carried it and walked back to the entrance of the valley. Then he put Atsu on the ground and said in a low voice, "Wait for me here." Atsu panted for a while, and the abnormalities in his body gradually subsided. It stood up again, glanced at Lu Chen, and then stuck out its tongue to lick Lu Chen's palm. Lu Chen smiled, then turned around and walked away, quickly disappearing into the depths of the gloomy valley. Only a gust of chilly wind swept past, sweeping up a cloud of dust and obscuring the world. Atsu was the only dog left at the entrance of the valley. It lay there for a while. Perhaps it was bored, or perhaps it felt that something was wrong. It stood up and looked around. The surroundings were desolate, and there was no movement at all. Atsu hesitated for a moment, then tried to take a step forward. But after a few steps, Atsu immediately felt that strange feeling from before again, so he quickly retreated. Then, it tried to walk a few steps along the edge of the valley, and soon discovered that this way of walking would not trigger the strange phenomenon. Atsu shook its body, stretched, and waited in the same place for a long time. But for some reason, Lu Chen still did not come back. Atsu waited in boredom. After a while, it finally stood up and slowly walked along the stone wall of the valley. The stone wall was hard and rough. It was unknown how many years it had been eroded by wind and rain here. It looked strange in shape, and many places were even as sharp as the edge of a knife. Atsu avoided those dangerous stones and slowly walked forward curiously. As it walked, it just happened to detour around a thick stone ridge that was filled with cracks. Suddenly, a gust of cold wind blew past. In an instant, all the cracks in the stone were filled with strong winds. Almost at the same time, a dozen incomparably shrill cries suddenly sounded behind Atsu. Roar! Ah! E! G! At that moment, it was as if thousands of ghosts were howling, and the scene could be said to be extremely terrifying. Atsu was shocked, and all the hair on his body instantly stood up. He let out a terrified howl, and almost subconsciously ran forward. This was really a desperate run. Along the stone wall of the valley, Atsu did not know how far it ran until it could not hold its breath anymore. The terrifying screams behind it could no longer be heard. Only then did it stop, panting, and looked back with a frightened look. It stood there for a moment, still panting, and looked very nervous. Its eyes kept looking in the direction of the strange screams, as if it was afraid that a terrible monster would suddenly jump out from the dark corner. At the same time, it subconsciously slowly retreated, feeling that the farther it was from that place, the better. However, as he retreated, Atsu suddenly felt his body jerk. It was as if his buttocks had bumped into an incomparably thick wall. It was startled for a moment, and turned its head to look. At the same time, a faint and gloomy wind blew over again with a sky full of dust, covering the sky and the sun. Behind the sandstorm, right in front of Atsu, a figure the size of a small mountain suddenly appeared. Because of the dust, the appearance of this enormous creature could not be seen, but Atsu's figure seemed especially small under the shadow of that black shadow. Atsu's eyes widened, and it stared blankly at the huge figure. And in the sandstorm, the huge monster also seemed to feel something, and it slowly turned its head. A black shadow covered the sky and covered the puppy in its shadow. A huge head descended from the sky. Before Atsu could see it clearly, he first saw a pair of eyes that were as huge as copper bells. They seemed to flicker with a terrifying light and shadow. The eyes slowly descended from the sandstorm and stared at Atsu. Atsu let out a cry, and its limbs became weak. With a plop, it directly fell to the ground. Lu Chen walked in the sandstorm, silently moving forward. The barren valley was filled with a strange and desolate atmosphere, as well as an invisible but abnormal feeling of chaos. But strangely, he seemed to be completely unaffected by it. When he gradually reached the center of the desolate valley, the terrain of the valley became even more chaotic. There were large and small cracks everywhere on the ground, crisscrossing each other. It was a ghastly sight. It was as if a terrible natural disaster had happened here a long time ago, and a powerful force had wreaked havoc here, leaving this valley with eternal marks of pain. And under his feet, the color of the ground gradually changed, from the lifeless lead gray color at the beginning, began to become scorched black and dark red marks, and the deeper he went into the valley, the darker the two colors became, giving a strange illusion. It was as if this barren valley was also alive, but at some time, it was stabbed by a knife, and endless blood flowed out. After the blood dried up, it became such an ugly and terrible appearance. All these terrible bloodstains appeared to be radiating outwards, and the source of all this was the circular open space in the center of the valley. Lu Chen slowly walked to this place. The sandstorm blew past him, sweeping up the lapels of his clothes, causing them to float slightly. In his line of sight, as the sandstorm slowly settled, a figure appeared in the ring. That person was not standing but sitting there, but even though he was just sitting, he looked as tall as an ordinary person standing. He sat in the circular open space, which seemed to be the source of all pain, horror and devastation, and also the source of all power, with his back facing Lu Chen, looking at this side of the world. After a while, the sandstorm rose again, and his figure became a little blurred. In the wind, a voice came, gentle and calm, sounding very similar to Lu Chen's usual tone. "You're here." Chapter 76. Lu Chen stood 10 feet away from that person, his eyes looking at the back of the figure in front of him with a complicated expression. Even though there was still sand and dust drifting in the air, but with the naked eye he could still see that the figure was very broad. Even if it was only in terms of width, that figure alone could be equivalent to 3 ordinary people. In other words, it was a fatty. A very, very fat fatty. So fat that old Ma would immediately become thin in front of him, to the extent that he would become a small magician in the presence of a big magician. Perhaps after a long time of greeting, there was no reply from Lu Chen. The sitting figure with some difficulty slowly turned around, looked at Lu Chen, and then a smile seemed to be heard. He beckoned and said, "Come over." Heaven and earth suddenly held their breath. The sand and wind abruptly stilled. The desolate valley was instantly silent. In that circular open space, all the wind and sand seemed to suddenly freeze. Only a white and fat palm passed through the sand and wind, gently waving. After a moment, the tiny and seemingly omnipresent grains of sand in the air, like a silent winter rain, fell down with a pitter-patter. The sand and wind that separated the two people, just like that, suddenly disappeared. Lu Chen looked up. All around him was empty, but further away, there was still sand and dust. Only in this place where they stood, it was as if a spherical pure land had been dug out from between heaven and earth. There was no wind, no sand, only the two of them. Great power could be seen in the small, going against heaven and earth to give birth to creation. That person, sitting on the ground, very, very fat, bald head and big ears, kind eyebrows, a gentle and calm smile on his face, a pair of eyes bright and clear, but also seemed to have some vicissitudes of life, as if he had seen through the world. He sat cross-legged, his hands looked a lot longer than ordinary people. His large robe covered his body, which was like a small mountain, looking like the legendary Maitreya Buddha smiling at the human world. "Sit." The man gently patted the ground in front of him, smiled and looked at Lu Chen. Lu Chen slowly walked over and stood in front of him. Even though one was standing while the other was sitting, the bald fatty's stature was not much shorter than Lu Chen's. One could imagine how tall and terrifying a giant he would be if he really stood up. Lu Chen's gaze was fixed on the bald fatty, but he had no intention of sitting down. Instead, he stood there silently. Of course, this was a little rude, but the bald fatty did not seem to mind. In fact, the gentle smile in his eyes deepened, as if he was looking at a stubborn and unruly child in his family. "I haven't seen you for 10 years, the bald fatty said with a sigh. "How have you been?" "Not good," Lu Chen said. The bald fatty nodded and said, "I think so too. It's been hard on you." Lu Chen sneered, probably too lazy to say anything more. He randomly found a place and sat next to the bald fatty. Suddenly looking for me, "What's the matter?" The bald fatty's eyes turned, but he did not immediately answer Lu Chen's question. Instead, he looked at the empty space and suddenly said, 10 years ago during the Battle of the Barren Valley, were those people sitting here?" "Yes." Lu Chen was silent for a moment before responding. "Tell me about it." Lu Chen suddenly raised his head and stared at the bald fatty. He said in a deep voice, "What do you mean?" "Nothing, just curious." The bald fatty smiled and looked at Lu Chen with a gentle smile. His clear eyes seemed to be able to see into the depths of his heart. He said, "Why can't I ask about this?" The two men looked at each other in the air for a while. After a moment, Lu Chen moved his eyes away and said lightly, "Yes. Yun Shouyang sits here." Lu Chen stood up and walked 6 feet in front of the bald fatty. He calmly pointed to the ground and said,
Fat and thin elders sit on his left and right.
Then, he walked a few steps forward and came to the middle.
He stamped his feet and said, "This is the eye of the god's subduing spell."
What about me? Is there anyone sitting here? The bald fatty asked. Luchin glanced at him and said, "Yes, it's that barbarian shaman." The bald fatty nodded, and there was a hint of emotion in his expression. He said, "The fire shaman is one of the 7 great shamans in the ancient inheritance of the southern border barbarian tribe. He has a powerful supernatural power. If he was at his peak, even I think he would be a big problem." "You've done well." For the first time, the bald fatty stopped smiling and straightened his face. He quietly looked at Lu Chen and said, "The world is blessed, the righteous path of the divine prefecture is blessed." "Really?" Lu Chen suddenly asked. After these 3 words, suddenly no one spoke, and the surroundings suddenly became silent. The thick dark clouds above their heads slowly rolled. Suddenly, there seemed to be a faint sound of thunder coming from the depths of the clouds, and the wind and clouds rolled. And in the middle of the barren valley, the 2 people looked at each other. This time, Lu Chen looked directly into the man's eyes. It was a pair of clear and pure eyes, but as deep as the sea, they seemed to be able to envelop the world, contain all things, and reflect countless scenes. At this moment, in the depths of those eyes, there seemed to be thunder and lightning flashing above the dark clouds in the sky. "Really?" The bald fatty suddenly smiled, then looked at Lu Chen and said slowly, "Are you questioning me, disciple?" At the edge of the barren valley, Black Dog too was already scared out of its wits by the gigantic creature's side, especially when it saw the gigantic head turn around and slowly lean down. When the pair of terrifying glowing eyes came closer, Atu's entire body trembled in fear. From this enormous figure, there was an unusually powerful aura that caused Atu to feel reverence and fear from the bottom of his heart. It was even to the extent that at this moment, he was practically unable to even let out a wail, and he could only lie on the ground and shiver. The wind blew and stopped, and the dust drifted down. A huge head slowly emerged from behind the wind and stretched out in front of Atsu. Atsu felt that one of the eyes on this huge head might be bigger than its own head, so it could not even see what kind of monster it was. After the huge shadow glanced at Atu, it stared at him for a moment and then let out a low moo. It seemed to be disdainful, but it also seemed to be uninterested. Then, it lazily turned its head back. It was also at this moment that Atsu finally calmed down, and it finally saw the figure in front of it clearly. It was a huge oxen, lying on the edge of the stone wall. Its body was very large, like a small mountain. However, the strangest thing was that on the head of this oxen, there were 2 giant horns. The horns were as smooth as jade, and faintly shone with spiritual light. Chapter 77. In the center of the valley, the atmosphere was a little stiff and no one spoke for a long time. Lu Chen stood in the middle of the circle and slowly turned around to look at his surroundings. All he could see was a desolate scene. However, in his eyes, there seemed to be another scene that was so hot that it was suffocating. It was a burning flame, a huge pillar of light that fell from the sky, a magnificent power that could split the heavens and the earth, and a light shadow that shattered into countless pieces like a nightmare. Along with it, there was also the pain of the black flame that seemed to be engraved in the depths of his soul and would never be forgotten. "I'm not your disciple." Lu Chen suddenly smiled. Looking at the bald fatty, he said calmly, "You're the high and mighty perfected Lord Tianlan, who is respected by all, and I'm just a shadow in a dark corner." After he said that, the expression of the bald fatty, who had a dignified and imposing manner that seemed to be able to swallow the world, or rather, the legendary figure perfected Lord Tianlan, suddenly changed. He lowered his head slightly, and there seemed to be a touch of pain in the depths of his eyes. After a while, he smiled bitterly and said, "Do you hate me in your heart?" Lu Chen shook his head slowly with a complicated expression, as if recalling something from the past. He said, "I don't think so. It's just that I often have nightmares over the years. I dream that I killed a lot of people. I dream that the ground is covered with fire and blood, and I dream that there are mountains of corpses and seas of blood." Perfected Lord Tianlan frowned, and a strange expression flashed across his face. He asked, "What happened?" After a moment of silence, Lu Chen looked up at him and said, "Back then, after I secretly destroyed the god-vanquishing spell here, the black flame curse immediately took effect and burned my flesh and soul. I was in great pain, and my mind became muddled.
I only vaguely remember that I walked out of the valley, and there seemed to be a fight in the middle.
The bloody scenes in my dreams seem to be from that time.
You didn't remember wrongly. Perfected Lord Tianlon suddenly interrupted him and said indifferently, the plan that we made that day was to cooperate with each other from the inside.
After you destroyed the god-vanquishing spell in the valley, Zheng Xianmeng's army launched a fierce attack from outside. Because most of the elites of the Three Realms Fiend cult were gathered here, the battle was extremely tragic.
The mountains of corpses and seas of blood you saw were probably the scene at that time.
Lu Chen was stunned, as if he didn't expect Perfected Lord Tianlon to be so direct. He hesitated for a moment and said, "Is that so? Then I dreamed that I killed a lot of people."
Perfected Lord Tianlon said, "No.
You fainted not long after you left the valley and was saved by someone. You didn't fight for long." You didn't fight. You didn't have fighting at all. Of the battle that year, you saw. Lu Chen was silent for a long time, but the gloominess on his face gradually lessened and he seemed to be more relaxed. After a while, he let out a long breath. Perfected Lord Tianlon sighed softly and said, "It's my fault. If I could meet you once in all these years, maybe you wouldn't be so sad." Lu Chen shook his head and said, "It's none of your business." "Oh right, Elder Yun Shouyang of the Fiend cult had a son and a daughter. The son's name was Yun Jian and the daughter was Yun Shaoqing. Do you know what happened to them?"
Perfected Lord Tianlon pondered for a moment and said, "They died in that battle."
Lu Chen hesitated for a moment and said, "How did they die?" Perfected Lord Tianlon looked at him and said, "When Zheng Xianmeng's army besieged the valley, they resisted stubbornly with other evildoers of the Fiend cult and killed many of our cultivators. They were killed in the battle." "They died in the battle?" "Yes." Lu Chen was silent again. After a while, he suddenly shook his head and sighed.
Then, he looked at Perfected Lord Tianlon and his eyes seemed to have regained some of their original brightness.
He said, "All right, after saying so much nonsense, you still haven't told me why you're looking for me." Perfected Lord Tianlon smiled and said, "That's right. A good man should face life with a smile."
Lu Chen snorted and said, "Easy for you to say.
If you're capable, let the black fire burn for 10 years before saying that." As he spoke, he was still a little indignant.
He cursed under his breath and said in a low voice, "Damn fatty."
Perfected Lord Tianlon smiled and shook his head, as if he did not hear that complaint. He said, "I do have something that I need your help with." "What is it?"
"Go to the Kunlun party and find an evildoer of the Fiend cult that has been in hiding for many years.
5 years ago, one of my secret agents in Fuyunji accidentally discovered a certain stronghold of the Fiend cult in the Immortal City. Then, under Shui Ying's leadership, Fuyunji put in a lot of effort and finally sent people to infiltrate it. However, after the battle in the valley, the Fiend cult that was greatly weakened became more cautious and the infiltrators could not get close to the core.
Until a month ago, we suddenly received a secret letter from him, saying that he had already found out that the Fiend cult was secretly setting up a great conspiracy and the person in charge was a Fiend cult elder."
When Lu Chen heard this, his pupils suddenly constricted.
Perfected Lord Tianlon glanced at him indifferently and continued, "However, things suddenly changed at this point.
The people of the devil cult suddenly noticed this and immediately counterattacked. We also tried our best to help but we were still a step too late. That person is dead. Before he died, he only said 2 things to me. 1. There is a spy of the Fiend cult in the Immortal Alliance and his position is extremely high. 2. The Fiend cult has a great plan but there is a key person in their plan who is still hiding in the Kunlun party. We don't know his intentions but once that person completes the mission, the Fiend cult will definitely succeed. The severity of the disaster is even greater than the disaster of the god-subduing curse in the valley." The valley became quiet again. For a long time the two of them did not speak. After a while Lu Chen said softly, "Why me? It's not like you don't know that the black flame curse has almost destroyed my cultivation. Now I am not much different from a mortal."
Perfected Lord Tianlon shook his head and said, "In this kind of matter, cultivation is not the most important.
Even 10 or 100 Jean Dan Friar may not be able to compare to you." Lu Chen smiled bitterly. Perfected Lord Tianlon said, "Actually I don't need to say something and you will also understand. Zheng Xianmeng is now too powerful, bloated and incompetent. The spy in a high position that the Death Warrior said is indeed possible. Since that is the case, everything that starts from Zhengxian Meng will be like a sieve. We can't continue. To do this, we must find a person who even Zhengxian Meng does not know.
Lu Chen laughed self-deprecatingly and said, "Then it will be me?
But don't forget, the remnants of the fiend cult are still searching for the whereabouts of that black wolf. But they can't find it." Perfected Lord Tianlan said lightly, "There are only 2 people in the world who really know your identity.
And other than you, I can't think of anyone else who knows the origins, cuts, codes, history, habits and all kinds of secret matters of the 3 realms divine sect like the back of his hand.
To find that deeply hidden evildoer of the fiend cult, only you can do it." Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at Lu Chen with a solemn expression and said word by word. Chapter 78. Lu Chen remained silent for a long time before he asked in a soft voice, "You trust me that much?" Perfected Lord Tianlan said, "The demons of the devil cult are as cunning as foxes and they are everywhere. But if I had to choose someone who would never conspire with the devil cult, I would only trust you." "I don't want to go," Lu Chen said.
Perfected Lord Tianlan frowned and asked, "Why?"
Lu Chen raised his head to look at him and said, "In these 10 years, every time the black fire burns my body, I feel like I'm better off dead.
When I think of all the things I've done in the past, the wind blades, the frost swords, and the blood on my hands, I sometimes wonder if all the suffering I've endured was worth it. For the people of the world or for the righteous path."
Lu Chen's face was a little bleak as he said, "You told me these words since I was young. I believed it and did it. But now I feel that this idea is quite meaningless." He looked at Perfected Lord Tianlan and said word by word, "What does the people of the world and the righteous path have to do with me? Why should I risk my life and suffer for those people I don't know and have nothing to do with?" Lu Chen looked at Perfected Lord Tianlan quietly and said, "Not to mention me, aren't you the same? All these years, you are the one who suppressed the devil cult the most in Zhengxian Meng. But what about the others? Aren't they all muddling along and living a befuddled life? How many people laugh at you behind your back for giving up your leisurely celestial life and insist on tormenting others? Not only that, there are probably countless people who hate and blame you just because you refuse to give in and block their path to wealth. Among them, there are even a few perfected lords with the same status as you."
Perfected Lord Tianlan sighed and said, "Are you saying that it's a thankless task for me?"
"Yes,"
Lu Chen said. "Why do you ask for trouble?
"With your current status and cultivation realm, no matter how arrogant the people of the devil cult are, as long as you don't go against them, they won't dare to provoke you easily. Even if they harm the world, they won't implicate you. Isn't that right?" Perfected Lord Tianlan fell silent.
After a while, he suddenly laughed and said, "What you said seems to make sense."
Lu Chen said, "Of course."
Perfected Lord Tianlan said, "Are you done?"
"I'm done."
Perfected Lord Tianlan thought for a moment and said, "Little Lu, listen to me.
A real man is born between heaven and earth. Don't always be calculative. You have to broaden your horizons. As the saying goes, set your heart for heaven and earth, set your life for the people, continue learning for the saints, and establish peace for all ages." "Open your head," Lu Chen scolded. "Damn Baldy, what are you pretending for? You were originally a good fatty, but after saying that, you immediately became as stupid as a pig. Do you understand the meaning of these words?" It's probably that when you read between the lines, you feel especially impressive. When you say it, you feel as if you're floating in the air, thinking that you're a cut above others, right? Let me tell you, stop putting on an act in front of me. You only know how to deceive people who don't read much." Perfected Lord Tianlan was not angry. Instead, he smiled. "You've been in a bad temper recently. I've already told you those grand principles 10 years ago. Do you mean that you don't want to listen anymore?" Lu Chen said, "I don't want to listen anymore, it's annoying." Let's put it another way. Look at how long the world is. You and I are born in this world and there are always some things that have to be done. Even if there are millions of people, I'll still go forward. A real man is hot-blooded for the people of the world. Hey, what do you mean by waving that finger at me?"
Lu Chen scoffed coldly and retracted his middle finger.
"Damn Baldy, if you say such nonsense again, I'll spit on you." Perfected Lord Tianlan rubbed his shiny bald head, looking a little awkward. Then he smiled. I'm used to it.
You know, back in Zhengxian Meng, I had to coax those simple-minded young people to work for the righteous path of the world.
I had to say that.
Scram! Lu Chen interrupted him rudely.
Is there a single word of truth?
I'll let it slide if you lie to me to work for you for 10 years.
If you don't say it now, I'm leaving.
Say what?
Speak human language.
Give me a reason. Why do the two of us not want to live a comfortable life, and must fight to the death against the evil cult, this kind of vicious and evil people?
Can I not say it?
No.
Boom! Suddenly, there was a loud sound.
It was perfected Lord Tianlan who slapped the ground beside him.
Instantly, a dragon roar and tiger roar could be heard from deep underground. The ground trembled and a few foot-wide cracks appeared.
Cracking sounds spread in all directions as countless gravel flew into the air.
All right, I'll say it.
Perfected Lord Tianlan's smile disappeared and his robes fluttered without any wind.
Suddenly, his aura skyrocketed like a god or a demon.
Looking at him, there was an illusion that he was indomitable. He shouted loudly, "I've King hated those idiots from the three realms for a long time."
His shout was like thunder exploding in the sky. Immediately, dark clouds rolled in the horizon and the sky changed color. Thunder rumbled from afar and the wind and clouds surged in the vast valley. The sound echoed from the surrounding cliffs as if the entire world was echoing that sentence. Lu Chen frowned and shook his head. His ears were still ringing non-stop, and even his head was faintly aching.
It could be seen that the power of that soul formation true monarch's angry shout just now was truly terrifying. After a while, when the roar in his head gradually calmed down, he looked up at perfected Lord Tianlan with a strange expression.
Just because of this? Perfected Lord Tianlan harumphed coldly with a straight face. These fools are always stirring up trouble. For the sake of some weird idea of unifying the three realms, they're going all out and causing trouble, causing us no peace. I've always liked the world to be peaceful since I was born. I like the skies to be clear and the people to live in peace. I'll look down on the common people to prove the great Tao of immortality. In the end, I was almost annoyed to death by them. Since they're making me unhappy, shouldn't I kill them?
Lu Chen looked at the bald fatty for a long time and suddenly laughed. It's been 10 years and you've become so vulgar. Where's the majestic aura of a soul formation perfected lord?
Perfected Lord Tianlan spat.
It's all because I was angered by you, my traitorous disciple.
Lu Chen waved it off.
Don't say that.
Back then, you told me clearly that you didn't acknowledge me as your disciple after I joined the fiend cult. Even if I die in front of you, I'll just die on my own.
Perfected Lord Tianlan froze for a moment and suddenly fell silent. After a while he sighed and said in a low voice, "You still remember it so clearly."
Lu Chen did not reply and merely said, "Cut the crap. What do I get out of working for you this time round?" Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled.
"Although I don't like fiend cults, eradicating them is for the sake of all living beings in the world.
Isn't it a little inappropriate for you to ask for benefits out of the blue?"
Lu Chen snorted disdainfully and said, "Is there?"
"Yes."
Perfected Lord Tianlan straightened his body and expression. After pondering for a moment, he looked at Lu Chen and said in a deep voice, "Apart from you, I have no other successor in my life. Now that this is over, I'll let you acknowledge your ancestors and join my Kunlun sect." Lu Chen harumphed and did not say anything.
"I'll impart everything I've learned to you. Everything I have will belong to you.
I truly feel guilty for the sufferings you've suffered in the past. Once this is over, I'll allow you to walk out of the shadows and stand in the light of the world. From then on, you'll be able to hold your head high and become a righteous disciple of a famous sect. Even if it's that 5,000-year-old Kunlun sect, as long as you have the opportunity, luck, and strength in the future, this old man will do his best to help you rise to the top. Why can't I hand over this famous sect to you?" At this point, Perfected Lord Tianlan suddenly stood up. He was actually a shoulder taller than an ordinary person, and his figure was strangely majestic. He looked like a mountain as he said word by word, "How about this?"
Lu Chen frowned but still did not say anything. Chapter 79.
After a long silence in the valley, Lu Chen sighed and said, "I'll agree to it."
Perfected Lord Tianlan raised his brows and revealed a gratified smile. "Really? That's great. But I thought you wouldn't agree so easily."
Lu Chen said indifferently,
The world is full of hardships and unfairness.
For the sake of the people in the world, for the sake of the righteous path in the world,
there are some things that have to be done. Perfected Lord Tianlong said. How did you become like this after 10 years? You have a bright future.
I learned all this nonsense from you. Lu Chen shook his head and said, those guys are always after me.
I've been hiding for 10 years and I'm tired of hiding.
I might as well take this opportunity to destroy them and get rid of all future troubles.
This time, it was Perfected Lord Tianlong's eyes that flashed with surprise. How can you be so sure that we can take this opportunity to destroy the fiend cult of the three realms?
Lu Chen smiled faintly.
I've been in the fiend cult for too long and I'm too familiar with their methods. Those fellows are all lunatics. Every single one of them wants to do something, but once they do, they want to do something that will shake the world and shake the earth.
He glanced at Perfected Lord Tianlong and narrowed his eyes. His eyes gradually revealed a trace of coldness as though he had returned to the black-robed youth whose hands were stained with blood.
He said coldly, 10 years ago, 3 out of 5 elders of the fiend cult were killed in the battle with the god-vanquishing curse. Now, they're plotting something big again. According to what you said, the consequences are even worse than the god-vanquishing curse. As such, we have to gather the strength of the entire fiend cult for us to have any hope. Since that's the case, isn't this our chance? Perfected Lord Tianlong took a deep look at Lu Chen.
His eyes were as bright as a blade.
He paced back and forth and nodded.
Makes sense. He then smiled.
Indeed, you're the only one who can deal with the fiend cult of the three realms.
Lu Chen snorted coldly and did not reply.
After a moment of silence he said, however, I still have a few things to tell you when I go to Kunlun.
Speak.
Lu Chen said, how do I join the Kunlun party? Perfected Lord Tianlong said, I am a perfected lord from the Kunlun party. It's too easy for me to arrange for a nobody like you to enter the sect. Naturally, it'll be done without anyone knowing.
Don't worry.
Lu Chen nodded and said, that's good. However, the Kunlun party has a disciple in the Qi refining state, Hong Chuan. He came to Qingshutang village where I live in seclusion and met me before. We even have some contacts. Maybe there are some hidden dangers? Perfected Lord Tianlong said indifferently, I'll get someone to send him out to work first. He'll come back after a year or so.
Yes.
Lu Chen continued, do you have any idea what the devil cult demons lurking in the Kunlun party are planning? This time, Perfected Lord Tianlong pondered for a while, then shook his head and said, the Kunlun party is a famous sect with 5,000 years of history. Although I'm a perfected lord, I can't completely grasp the sect's secrets. Currently, I know nothing about that person, so I can't tell you anything. All right, Lu Chen smiled in a self-deprecating manner and said, anyway, it's not the first time, Perfected Lord Tianlong said. If there's nothing else, go find Xiao Ma and let him take you to Kunwu City first. I'll make arrangements later. Lu Chen nodded and turned to leave.
However, after walking for about 10 feet, he suddenly heard Perfected Lord Tianlong's voice coming from behind.
Oh yes, there's something I've wanted to ask you for a long time.
Lu Chen turned to look at the unusually tall bald fatty and said, what is it?
Perfected Lord Tianlong stared at him and said slowly, you joined the devil cult when you were young and hid for many years. During this period, you lived with the devil cult demons day and night. Do you know any close friends? Lu Chen was silent for a while, as if he was recalling the past. Then, he looked at Perfected Lord Tianlong's calm but unfathomable eyes. His expression did not change and he said calmly, no. On the other side of the valley, at the edge of the stone wall, a huge jade-horned green bull was lazily kneeling on the ground, and beside it, the pitifully small black dog Atu was cowering and hiding at the side. Seeing that Oxen had been lazy since the beginning and didn't seem to want to pay attention to it, Atsu finally calmed down a little after its initial panic. When Oxen turned its head back and seemed to be dozing off again, Atsu shrunk its body and slowly moved backward bit by bit. Its movements were particularly cautious, as if it was afraid of making the slightest sound and startling this huge monster. However, it was somewhat unfortunate that although Atsu retreated quietly, at this moment, a thunderous roar suddenly came from the center of the vast valley. I have long disliked you. For a long time. The roaring sound wave seemed to have substance, instantly sweeping up millions of dust and sand. Like a storm, it swept over and heavily smashed against the hard stone wall. Atu was actually shocked, and immediately after, he suddenly cried out in fear.
It was because his body was blown by a gust of wind that came out of nowhere, and the force actually swept his entire body into the air, and then he was about to smash into the stone.
At this critical moment, a huge shadow suddenly approached from the storm of dust and sand. Then, a thick rope-like object flew over and directly wrapped around Atsu in mid-air. Just as this little black dog was about to hit the hard stone wall and break its head and bleed, it was forcibly pulled back. Atsu barked wildly. Its 4 legs struggled desperately, but at this moment, it could not control itself. It was directly pulled to the other side of the sandstorm, and a moment later, it fell heavily to the ground. After a while, the sudden roar disappeared, and the inexplicable strange wind also disappeared. Only then did Atsu realize that it had fallen back to the side of the huge oxen, and the thing that had just saved it seemed to be this oxen's tail. Oxen's thick and long tail swung behind it and retracted. Then, its huge head turned to look at this little dog, and then it turned back expressionlessly.
It seemed that the action just now for this rare oxen was just a small effort that it did when it was in a good mood.
It was not worth mentioning at all.
Atsu lay on the ground in a daze for a while.
Suddenly, it barked, jumped up, and ran away. Oxen seemed to be a little surprised. It looked back and saw that the dog was running away in a panic. After watching for a while, it swung its tail again and let out a low moo.
Atsu ran all the way, and it didn't take long to run back to the entrance of the valley.
Only then did it stop to catch its breath. After a while, Lu Chen also came out. Atsu quickly leaned over and used its head to rub against Lu Chen's leg. Lu Chen seemed to have something on his mind. He did not notice anything wrong with Atsu. He just gently touched its head with his hand and continued to walk out. Atsu looked back in that direction, barked twice, shook its head, and ran away with Lu Chen. Chapter 80. Do you know, sometimes I'm very suspicious of your identity and background? On the hillside outside the valley, 2 people and a dog sat together. Lu Chen grabbed a drumstick that Old Ma handed to him and ate it. At the same time, he mumbled something. Somehow, Old Horse had brought a lot of food with him. At this time, he took them all out and even grabbed a meat bone and threw it to Atu. This made the black puppy so happy that it lay on the side and gnawed happily. The sound of chewing could be heard continuously.
This puppy is not bad, but it's lame, Old Ma sighed and then turned to Lu Chen and said, "What did you say just now?"
Lu Chen didn't even look at him and murmured again. Old Ma sneered and said, "I have a clean background, and I'm loyal and courageous. What are you doubting?" Lu Chen glanced at him and sneered, "I've seen through you in the past 10 years. You're fat, ugly and stupid. You can't even do business or cultivate." "Hey!" Old Ma said angrily, "Bastard, it's fine if you say I'm fat, but how can you say I'm stupid? If I didn't protect you for the past 10 years, you would have died many times." Lu Chen ignored Old Ma's protest and continued to say, "You're stupid, fat, and have low cultivation. But for more than 10 years, the famous Lord Tianlan didn't trust anyone and only let you hang out with me. If that damn Baldy didn't lie and really values me as much as he does, then there must be something wrong with your identity." He looked at Old Ma with interest and clicked his tongue. "Why does he trust a useless person like you so much? Are you the bastard son of that damn Baldy?" Old Ma was a little surprised. "Get out!" Old Ma glared at him and said, "How dare you slander me when you're eating my food? Spit out the chicken." Lu Chen threw the chicken drumstick at him. Old Ma twisted his body and dodged it. "Hey, you're good at martial arts." Old Ma smiled proudly and said, "Of course these days I—" "Oh!" Before Old Ma finished his words, he was interrupted by Lu Chen. He seemed to suddenly think of something and stared at Old Ma with a strange expression. He said, "That damn Baldy is a super fat man, but you're just an ordinary fat man. Are you really a dissolute man left by that damn Baldy when he was young?" "Bah!" Old Ma said angrily, "If you talk nonsense again, I'm going to fall out with you." Lu Chen laughed and clapped his hands. He reached out to Old Ma and said, "Do you have wine?" Old Ma threw a wine gourd over. Lu Chen caught it, opened the cork and took a big gulp. Then he let out a long breath and said, "Good wine." Old Ma looked at him. Gradually, his eyes softened. After a while he sighed and said, Have you really thought it through? It's hard to say whether this trip to Kunlun will be a blessing or a curse. Lu Chen smiled and looked at old Ma.
He said, shouldn't you help him and try to persuade me to go?
Old Ma shrugged and said, it doesn't matter to me. Besides, I've stayed with you in that village for 10 years. To be honest, I don't want you to take the risk. Lu Chen was silent for a moment. Then he said indifferently, I've thought about it. I want to go. Old Ma nodded and didn't say anything else. When he stood up and was about to pack his things, he lightly patted Lu Chen's shoulder. Lu Chen smiled at him gently. When they were packing their things and preparing to leave, Lu Chen asked Old Ma, after leaving Qingshitang village, where have you been? What have you been doing? Old Ma didn't care about his image. He pulled up his waistband and patted his chubby belly. Then he walked along the mountain path with Lu Chen and said, I've been recuperating. After I've recuperated, I went to Kunwu City and opened a small shop. Lu Chen paused and looked at him with a strange expression. He said, You've been preparing for this for a long time? Old Ma said indifferently, I can't say that I've been preparing for a long time. But since I had nothing to do anyway, I thought you'd definitely have a bad relationship with the Kunlun party in the future, so I just ran to Kunwu City. It'd be weird if I believed you. Lu Chen sneered and walked forward. However, a complicated light seemed to flash in the depths of his eyes. Tu ran past the two of them, shaking his head and wagging his tail excitedly. It was just that he was limping due to his leg injury, which made him look very awkward. Old Ma looked at it for a while and said to Lu Chen, What's the matter with this puppy? Lu Chen said, I picked it up on the road a few days ago. Old Ma was a bit surprised. He said, Huh? Has your temperament changed? Has your heart softened? Lu Chen said, No, I just thought that if I'm hungry and can't find anything to eat, I'll eat dog meat to stave off my hunger. Old Ma said, Just pretend I didn't say that. Lu Chen said, Right, since you've settled down in Kunwu City, I presume that with your means, you must have investigated a lot about the Kunlun party. Let me ask you something. Have there been any particularly outstanding young disciples in the Kunlun party recently? Old Ma smiled complacently. Soon after, he pondered with rapt attention for a while and said, The Kunlun party is a famous and large sect. It has many disciples and outstanding talents. Now that you've asked me this question, I don't know what to say. There are many candidates. Lu Chen thought for a while and said, A few days ago, somewhere in this chaotic land, I met someone in the middle of the night. As he said this, he told Old Ma about the situation that happened that night. Then he said, The moonlight slash is a Taoist technique that is extremely difficult to cultivate in Kunlun. It's difficult for people who aren't talented to cultivate it. Plus, the person was a young woman. Perhaps you know about it? Old Ma frowned. After thinking carefully for a while, he shook his head and said, I know about the moonlight slash, but I really can't think of any young female Kunlun party disciple who could cultivate this technique in the past few years. Let's go back to Kunwu City first. I'll help you secretly inquire about it. It shouldn't be a big problem to find that person. As he said this, he paused and said, What's wrong? You haven't even seen that woman's face yet. Why are you suddenly so interested in her? Lu Chen smiled and put a finger in front of his eyebrows. Then he slowly moved forward and lightly touched his forehead a few times. He said calmly, That night the tip of her sword was right here. If it was just a little bit further forward, it would probably have pierced through my head. The smile on Old Ma's face suddenly faded a bit. He raised his eyes and looked at Lu Chen with a faintly worried expression. However, Lu Chen continued to talk without any change in his expression. He only said indifferently, It's been many years since someone pointed a sword at my head like this. Woof 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 woof. The Atsu dog in front of them had already run far away. It turned its head and barked at the two of them, seemingly urging them to hurry up. Lu Chen quickened his pace. At the same time he calmly said, Find her. Old Ma nodded. He sighed and said, All right, I understand. Chapter 81. The Kunlun party got its name from the mountain. The entire sect was built on the Kunlun mountain range, which had the reputation of being the most famous mountain in the Western continent. 5,000 years ago, a cultivator, Kuan Yuanzi and Tai Luo traveled the world. They passed by the western continent's Kunlun mountain range. It was a time of chaos. The spiritual mountain was covered in dust, and there were countless bandits. They killed and looted all day long, turning the area within 1,000 miles into a hell of water and fire. However, one night, there was a sudden change in the sky. Kuan Yuanzi and Tai Luo both saw a huge star fall from the sky and fall into the mountain. That night, the mountain range trembled. Strange lights soared into the sky, and spiritual energy shrouded the mountains and covered the sun like clouds. In the following days, strange things happened around the Kunlun mountain. It snowed in the summer, and women took over the mourning. The land trembled several times a day, and there were signs of mountains collapsing and the earth cracking. The weather was also unpredictable. What's more, strange demons, ghosts, and demonic beasts appeared in the back of the mountain. They were ferocious and valiant. Although there weren't many of them, they often captured people for food. The people of the world were terrified and fled the mountain. No matter where they were, they all said that a great demon had appeared in the mountain, and that it would bring disaster to the world and slaughter all living things. Kunlun Mountain would become a sea of blood. However, Kuan Yuanzi and Tai Luo had unique insight. They thought that this mountain was a supreme spiritual vein in the world and the foundation of a great cause. They bowed to the heavens and made a great vow. They were willing to become the master of the spiritual mountain. After that, the two of them used their great divine abilities to stabilize the world, slay demons, expel bandits, and appease the common people. During this period, their sincerity moved the heavens, and they obtained a great fortune in the depths of the spiritual mountain. They saw the immemorial immortal mansion. They obtained an ancient immortal jade book that passed down a peerless immortal technique. It was also said that there was a resplendent treasure light and a supreme immortal weapon. Since the fortune had arrived, there was nothing more to say. The two ancestors established a sect on this Kunlun mountain, accepted disciples, and established a great cause that would not last for 10,000 generations. This was the Kunlun party of today. The Kunlun party had been passed down for 5,000 years. Outstanding people had emerged in large numbers. The Kunlun party had always flourished in the world of human cultivators, which was truly an anomaly. The Kunlun party was founded 2,000 years earlier than Zhengxianmeng. It could be said to be the well-deserved #1 sect in the cultivation world today. However, talented people emerged in every generation, and the new generation surpassed the old. In today's incomparably prosperous cultivation age, the human cultivation world was thriving. Countless geniuses and outstanding talents emerged one after another, and cultivation sects, large and small, were springing up like bamboo shoots after a rain. In terms of strength and prestige alone, the cultivation world of the divine central continent was already filled with heroes, and there was no longer a situation where one sect dominated. Today's Kunlun party had gone through 5,000 years of trials and hardships. It had already taken over the vast Kunlun mountain range as its private property. There were no less than 10,000 of its direct disciples who had achieved success in cultivation, and there was even a deity transformation stage true lord who had exceedingly high Taoist magic presiding over the sect. It could be said that it had an illustrious reputation and sat firmly on the throne of a famous sect. In addition, the Kunlun party also had disciples in the Qi refining realm who had just caught a glimpse of the door, as well as many miscellaneous disciples. There were even more people in this area, more than 100,000 in total. Such a large sect was also a behemoth in the vast western continent. Corresponding to it was Kunwu City at the foot of Kunlun Mountain SX. For thousands of years, it had gradually become one of the most prosperous and largest cities in this vast area. Have you been here before? When Old Ma and Lu Chen walked into this big city and walked in the bustling Kunwu City with tall buildings, Old Ma asked Lu Chen. Lu Chen nodded and said, "I've been here before." Ha! Old Ma was a bit surprised and said, "When?" "You've been with me for the past 10 years, and before that, you were working. When did you get here?" Lu Chen's gaze swept over the spacious and flat streets of Kunwu City and said, "I was probably 5 or 6 years old. I don't remember too clearly." Old Ma was startled and asked, "What happened?" Lu Chen said, "I came to look for food. There are many people here, so I can find a lot of food in the garbage." Old Ma was silent. After a long time he said, "What happened next?" Lu Chen smiled and said, "I don't know how much time has passed, but that damn baldy suddenly appeared in front of me. He said he would let me eat my fill and wear my clothes. He told me to go with him, so I went with him. Old Ma sighed and seemed to want to say something, but Lu Chen suddenly turned around and waved his hand. He shouted with a smile. Atsu, keep up. There are so many people here. If you get lost, you won't be able to find us. Woof, woof, woof. After a few barks, the lame black dog quickly ran over from the crowd behind them and affectionately rubbed against Lu Chen's feet. On the way from the land of chaos to Kunwu City, Atsu seemed to have grown a bit. It was unknown whether it was because old Ma brought a lot of food, so this gluttonous dog ate as much as it could every day. Where's your shop? Lu Chen patted Atsu's head and turned to ask old Ma. Is it on this street? Old Ma glanced at the bustling street filled with shops and said without changing his expression, It's tasteless to open a shop in such a vulgar and noisy place. Come with me. Lu Chen immediately had a whole new level of respect for old Ma. I haven't seen you for a while, but you've actually developed taste. TSK. Old Ma snorted disdainfully. He put his chubby hands behind his back and walked forward like a rich man. Lu Chen and Atsu followed behind him and walked down the street. They walked down another street. They walked down another street. After walking down another street. Another street. Hey! Lu Chen couldn't help but call out to the fat man who was already sweating profusely. He looked at him suspiciously and said, Are we not there yet? Why do I feel like we're almost out of the city? Old Ma stopped and wiped the beads of sweat from his forehead. He glanced at the towering city wall in front of him and laughed. Soon, soon. As he said this, he walked forward for a while and suddenly turned to the side. He walked into an alley by the side of the road. After walking for 2 or 3 feet, a wooden door appeared in front of them. Lu Chen stood in the alley and looked around. He saw that the place was deserted and there was no trace of anyone. It was a world of difference from the bustling streets that they had walked through before. On top of the wooden door, there was a signboard with 3 words written on it. Black Hill Pavilion. Do you have any business in this place? Lu Chen couldn't help but ask Old Ma. Old Ma sneered and said, What do you know? There's an old saying, fragrant wine needs no dark alley. Do you know that? As he said this, he took out a key and unlocked the door of the house. He led Lu Chen inside and said, Besides, this place has a lot of benefits. In this noisy city, it's the best place to find peace and quiet. Walk 2 streets north and you'll reach the exit of the city gate. Walk 2 streets south and you'll reach the mansions of the influential families in the city. It's such a good place, but the price of the house can't even compare to a month's rent for an ordinary shop on the street in the center of Kunwu City. When I came here that day, I thought about it for a bit and decided to buy this house. In the future, it can be regarded as an ancestral property of my old Ma family. After saying this, old Ma looked complacent. He looked around and then looked at Lu Chen. He said with a smile, What do you think? Lu Chen said, If you don't have money, just say it. What's with all this nonsense? Chapter 82. Old Ma said, Big brother, poor people also have dignity. They also need to live. Lu Chen snorted and said, Living is living. Who are you trying to fool with all that extravagant talk? Old Ma said seriously, Although we are poor, we also need to have dreams, right? If you think about this place better, you will feel that this place is really not bad. Lu Chen shook his head and was speechless. He turned around and shouted, Atsu! Atsu barked and ran over, following Lu Chen and old Ma inside. This house was actually not too small. It had 2 entrances, facing the street. Well, facing the alley was a front hall. Old Ma had made a counter. It seemed that he wanted to make it look like a shop. Behind it was a small courtyard. It was not big, but it was square, with a walkway on both sides. There were 2 more rooms at the back. They were not too big, but they were enough for people to sleep in. Hey, it's not bad, Lu Chen said to Old Ma. Old Ma immediately became happy. He laughed and said, I'm not wrong, am I? It's barely okay to live here, but forget about doing business. You won't be able to make a lot of money. Lu Chen stood in the barren courtyard and casually said, I just need to plant some rocks, grass and 2 trees here. That should do it. Get lost. I don't have money to waste on those boring things. Lu Chen laughed and did not care. He asked casually, "You just said that there are big families living in the city nearby?" Old Ma scratched his head and said, "Oh, actually it's not too close. It's about 2 streets away. Over there is the gathering place of the old mansions of the influential families in the city. Quite a few of them have close relationships with the Kunlun party, whether overtly or covertly." Lu Chen nodded. This was also a matter of course. Kunwu City was at the foot of Kunlun Mountain, and with such a huge Kunlun party entrenched here, no matter who it was, they would want to curry favor with this incomparably huge thigh. Old Ma walked into the inner room, opened one of the rooms, and said, "You can stay here for now. When the immortal side is ready, I will arrange for you to enter the Kunlun party directly." Lu Chen nodded and said, "All right." At nightfall, Kunwu City gradually quieted down. The night breeze swept by and the lights of tens of thousands of households were lit. In an inconspicuous corner of the city, in a small house in a shabby alley, Old Ma and Lu Chen moved a small table and placed it in the courtyard. Then they each sat on a stool, brought a pot of wine, 2 cups, and 3 plates of side dishes, and chatted in the courtyard. A cold moon hung high in the night sky, its faint light sprinkling down, bestowing the small courtyard with a bit of light. However, under the eaves of the surrounding houses, there was only darkness. In the shadows, like a ghost, Atsu poked its head out of the dark corner of the corridor and carefully looked around. Then it wagged its tail and sniffed around the small courtyard before sneaking to a corner to pee. Only then did it run back to Lu Chen's side, stretched its body, and lay down at Lu Chen's feet. Lu Chen casually picked up a chicken foot from the plate and tossed it over. Atsu didn't even get up. It just stretched its neck forward and caught it in one bite. Then it leaned against Lu Chen's feet and began to happily chew on it. Old Ma glanced at Atsu and said, "When you go up the mountain in a few days, what about this black dog?" Lu Chen picked up the wine pot and poured some wine into his cup. He said, "I'll leave it with you for now. Once I settle down at the Kunlun party, I'll see if I can bring it up the mountain." Old Ma rolled his eyes and said, "The spirited mountain of Kunlun is the world's #1 paradise. There are all kinds of celestial and auspicious beasts on the mountain. How can you bring a lame dog up there?" Lu Chen rubbed his chin and said thoughtfully, Now that you mention it, I suddenly remember that when I was risking my life outside in the past, when I was in danger at the gates of hell, I had eaten quite a lot of the flesh and blood of the various demonic beasts. Only these legendary spiritual beasts of the immortals have never been seen before." Old Ma's face darkened. He glared at Lu Chen and said, "Hey, you haven't even gone up the mountain and you're already thinking about whether the meat of the spiritual beasts on the mountain tastes good or not. That's not very good." Lu Chen smiled and said, "I was just thinking about it." Old Ma looked at him suspiciously and said, "But why do I feel like you're up to no good? TSK, what a villain." Lu Chen threw away the topic disdainfully and said, "How's the current situation in the Kunlun party? Tell me about it." Old Ma nodded and said, "Now the huge Kunlun mountain range is already under the control of the Kunlun party. The spirited mountain range is continuous and undulating. Over the past thousands of years, countless immortal caves have been opened. But the most important place is the so-called spring, summer, autumn, and winter peaks between the sky and clouds. They are in the depths of Kunlun and are suspended above the mountains. They are the world's #1 wonders. Legend has it that they were created by the fall of a star 5,000 years ago." Lu Chen nodded and said, "I've also heard of the 4 floating peaks between the sky and clouds. Although I haven't seen them with my own eyes, I think they must be amazing wonders." Old Ma said, "Not only that, it is said that the spiritual power on the 4 floating peaks is more than 10 times that of the mortal world. It is a natural holy land for cultivation. In the Kunlun party, except for the 2 perfected deity transformation, it is said that only Yuanying Zhenren is qualified to set foot on these 4 strange peaks." Lu Chen raised his glass and clinked it with Old Ma's. He said with a smile, "I wonder if we will have the chance to go up and see in the future?" Old Ma shrugged and said with a smile, "I think we will have the chance to stand on the ground and look up for a few times." Lu Chen laughed and drank the wine in his glass. Then he said, "Tell me about those sections." Old Ma pondered for a moment and said, "Nowadays, there are many heroes in the cultivation world. Although the Kunlun party can't be said to be second to none, it is still one of the top 5 sections. There are indeed many heroes in the sect. However,
After you enter the sect in the future, you still have to pay attention to one thing.
At this point, his voice slightly lowered. He said, the Kunlun party has been passed down to this day, and its orthodoxy has never been broken. However, there were two founders in the past, Kuan Yuanzi and Tai Luo.
Therefore, the orthodoxy that has been passed down over the years is actually divided into two factions.
One is called Kuanji, and the other is called Tieji. Lu Chen frowned and said, why, these two factions don't get along?
Old Ma said, they are harmonious on the surface, but not on the inside.
Lu Chen nodded and said, could it be that they are secretly scheming against each other?
Not at all.
Old Ma smiled and said lightly.
Lu Chen was startled for a moment, then he said with a smile, oh, this is strange.
Old Ma said, there is nothing strange about it, because the Tieji branch of the Kunlun party has been on the decline for many years. On the contrary, the Kuanji branch is growing stronger day by day. The two great perfected gods of the current Kunlun party, Tianlan and Bai Chen, are both from the Kuanji branch. Among the 19 Yuanying perfected ones, 15 are from the Kuanji branch. What do you think?
Lu Chen said, oh, I see.
No wonder the Tieji branch wants to tuck their tails between their legs.
Old Ma laughed and said, who says it isn't?
Originally, the Kuanji and Tieji legacies were divided equally among the spirited mountain of Kunlun. Not to mention other things, just the 4 strange peaks in the sky and clouds were 2 on each side. But now perfected Lord Tianlan has 1, Hakushin Jinkuan has 1, and the remaining 2 have been occupied by the 15 Yuanying perfected ones. If you were a disciple of the Tieji branch, what would you do?
Lu Chen thought for a moment, then said with a smile, why not rebel?
Chapter 83. Old Ma spat and looked at Lu Chen with disdain. He said, do you think you can rebel just because you say so? It's easy for you to say that.
Lu Chen laughed and poured wine into their glasses again. He said, then what do you think we should do?
Old Ma said sternly, if I were a disciple of Taiji's lineage, I wouldn't be able to defeat the Kuanji who have the advantage in numbers. Then I might as well admit defeat and behave myself. Besides, the two of us are saying alarmist words here. In fact, in the Kunlun party, the two groups of disciples may not really be like fire and water. No matter what, they are still Kunlun disciples of the same sect and ancestor. They just have some disputes on ordinary days. How big of a deal can it be? Lu Chen thought for a moment, then said, what you said makes sense. Perhaps in another 200 or 300 years, the tables will turn. At that time, the iron branch's strength will suddenly soar, suppressing the Kuanji branch.
Old Ma laughed and said, isn't that so?
Who knows what will happen in the future? Let's drink, let's drink. The two of them clinked their glasses and made a crisp sound. The black dog lying under the table looked up and then lowered its head to gnaw on the bone.
Old Ma glanced at Lu Chen and said with a smile, speaking of which, in a few days, I may go up the mountain to become a Kunlun disciple.
At that time, everything will naturally be arranged by that person. I think he will not treat you too badly. Oh yes, as a disciple, it doesn't matter which branch you belong to. The most important thing is to be well-informed and convenient.
Lu Chen interrupted Old Ma's speech and said, you go tell the damn baldy that I want to be in Kuanji. If he dares to put me in Tieji, I will kill his oxen.
Cough, cough, cough. Old Ma suddenly choked and coughed on the spot. There are a lot of influential clans in Kunwu City, and most of them are the descendants of experts who have achieved the Tao in the Kunlun party for several thousand years. They have been passed down from generation to generation, and they are inextricably linked to the Kunlun party. Old Ma pointed to the north and said, these big families and clans have 2 biggest advantages. First, they follow the Kunlun party wholeheartedly and become its claws, teeth, and eyes. I don't dare to say far away, but within a radius of 2,000 miles from Kunwu City, nothing can escape the Kunlun party's grasp. Second, over the years, almost all the outstanding talents in these big families and clans have entered the Kunlun party's tutelage, and many outstanding talents have emerged from them. Lu Chen nodded. Suddenly he frowned and said, according to you, we can't hide from the Kunlun party's spies even if we come here? Old Ma snorted and proudly said, that's only for ordinary people. What kind of person am I, Old Ma Xiaoyan?
No one can recognize me no matter what I do, not to mention that I have that person secretly watching over me. Don't worry, it'll be fine. Lu Chen laughed and said, in any case, it's those children of influential clans who are powerful, right? We can't afford to offend them. Old Ma rolled his eyes and said, bullshit. At the end of the day, you brat, there's someone standing behind you, supporting you. Until now, that person still doesn't have a disciple, but he has an exceedingly powerful peerless divine ability. If you really shed all pretense of cordiality with him, even if all the influential families in Kunwu City joined hands, none of them would dare to oppose you. Lu Chen laughed and said, unfortunately, I can't have a falling out with him, so I can only endure, right? Old Ma sternly said, that's right.
Then aren't you talking nonsense?
I'm not talking nonsense.
Old Ma solemnly said, while you're suppressing your resentment, you can think to yourself, when I'm done with my business in the future, I'll come and settle the score with you. Let's see if you idiots who look down on others will kneel in front of me at that time. Lu Chen couldn't help but laugh and said, you're really thinking too far ahead. Old Ma laughed mischievously and said, of course. All these years, I've been so angry at you that my life has been shortened by 10 years. Every time, didn't I secretly think like this to get through it? Lu Chen extended a finger to him to show his respect, then he casually said, nowadays in the Kunlun party, who has a deep background and can't be provoked? Tell me all of them. In the future, I'll stay away from them. Old Ma thought for a moment then said, right now, you have the air of a useless person on your face. At most, you're only at the qi refining realm. The Kunlun party is so big, and there are at least 80 to 90,000 people with higher cultivation than you. It seems like you can't provoke any of them. Lu Chen, Old Ma said again. Oh, but of course there are some who are especially powerful. You especially can't provoke them. Everyone, people as powerful as Spiritual Master Yuanying and Jean Dan Friar can crush you with a finger. Their direct disciples are almost all elite disciples, so you should also stay away from them. As for the disciples of the aristocratic families, although there are many Kunwu aristocratic families, there will always be ups and downs. Right now, the most powerful families are probably the Bai, Tai, and Su clans. You should give in to them. As for the small aristocratic families that have declined, they actually don't matter. Lu Chen suddenly thought of something and asked, is there an aristocratic family with the surname Yi in this city? How strong is it? Yi clan. Old Ma thought for a moment then said, it's all right. These years, I haven't heard of any powerful figures emerging from this family. It can't be considered one of the most powerful families, but it can't be said to have declined either. It can be considered average. Why are you asking about it? Lu Chen said, oh, it's nothing. I've seen a girl from this family before. He then told Old Ma about how he met Exin in the Land of Chaos. Old Ma frowned and said, why didn't you tell her about this? Lu Chen said indifferently, what would happen if I told her? Old Ma didn't hesitate at all and said, of course, I'd think of a way to avoid this flaw and not let her get in the way. Halfway through his sentence, Old Ma's voice suddenly dropped and his expression changed slightly. He glanced at Lu Chen, shook his head, and sighed softly. He didn't say anything else. Lu Chen smiled and said, yes, don't let her get in the way. He lowered his head and looked at the wine cup in his hand. The amber wine trembled slightly in the cup. After a while, he raised the cup and drank the wine. As the days passed, Lu Chen quietly stayed in the small courtyard. It could be said that he didn't go out at all. Fatty Old Ma went out a few times. He came and went in a hurry, and no one knew what he was busy with. Even Black Dog sneaked out to stroll in the alley outside, but he quickly ran back. When he was bored, Lu Chen would sit behind the counter in the front hall when Old Ma went out. He said that he was helping Old Ma look after the shop. However, he soon realized how accurate his previous judgment was. For a whole 7 days, he didn't see a single customer come to the Black Hill Pavilion. On the morning of the 8th day, Old Ma very seriously told Lu Chen that there should be some progress in helping him infiltrate the Kunlun party, and he would go out to do it. So Lu Chen sat quietly behind the lonely counter and looked out the door at the quiet alley. Atsu lay directly in front of the door, enjoying the passing wind from the alley. Its tail wagged from time to time, as if it was enjoying its dog life. Suddenly, there was a sudden sound of footsteps coming from the bluestone road in the alley outside. After a moment,
A clear and melodious voice, like a wind chime gently swaying in the spring breeze, came from outside.
Black Hill Pavilion. What a strange name. Chapter 84.
The black dog suddenly pricked up its ears, then suddenly jumped up and stared at the door with its eyes shining. It bared its sharp fangs and let out a low growl from its throat, looking like it was about to bite someone. There was an exclamation from outside the house, but a moment later, a figure suddenly appeared at the door.
It was Lu Chen.
Lu Chen kicked the stupid dog to the ground and scolded, "Stupid dog!
This is a guest.
If you want to eat meat and bones in the future, you will have to rely on him.
Do you want to die? Woo-woo."
The low and fierce growl suddenly changed, and the ferocious aura on the black dog disappeared in the blink of an eye. It wagged its tail wildly and hummed in a low voice. It ran out of the door and circled the figure outside the door twice, shaking its head and wagging its tail without any integrity to speak of.
Ah, yeah.
The person outside the house was shocked at first, then let out a sound of, "Ha!" but then burst out laughing. She covered her mouth and laughed. "Why is this dog so fun?" Lu Chen looked up and saw a young girl about 10 years old standing on the bluestone road outside the house. She had almond-shaped eyes and peach cheeks, and her skin was as white as snow. Although she had not grown up yet, from the looks of it, she would definitely be a stunning beauty in the future. At this moment, the little girl looked at the black dog jumping around beside her. She seemed to find it very interesting, and she was full of smiles. There was a soft breeze blowing through the alley, and her red sleeves fluttered in the wind. At this moment, the spring breeze, the deep alley, and the young girl. This scene was like a beautiful painting. Lu Chen called out to the stupid dog that was jumping around blindly. Then, his gaze fell on the girl's face, and he couldn't help but sigh in admiration in his heart. Although the girl in front of him wasn't very old, her complexion was truly the first time he'd seen someone with such a complexion. It could be said that she was born with a beauty that could cause the downfall of nations and people since she was young.
"Miss, what's the matter?"
Lu Chen asked the little girl politely, and at the same time, glanced into the distance of the alley. There was no one in the alley. She seemed to have come alone. The girl pointed at the signboard with the words, "Black Hill Pavilion," and asked, "Is this a shop?" Lu Chen was startled for a moment, then he turned around and said,
"I guess so."
The girl nodded with a smile and walked in. At the same time, a pair of bright and clear eyes looked at the simple things in the shop. She was a little curious and a little cautious. Lu Chen walked back to the counter and asked, "What do you want to buy?"
"Yes,"
the young lady responded, but she didn't speak immediately. Instead, she glanced at the row of shelves behind the counter. There were some items on the shelves inside the store. Most of them were the most common spirit materials. They looked like they had been there for a long time because many places were covered in dust. After noticing that the girl's gaze had become a little strange, Lu Chen also turned around to look. When the scene on the shelves fell into his eyes, Lu Chen was also stunned for a moment. Then he turned around and smiled a little awkwardly, saying, "The owner of this shop is very lazy. I've let you see a joke."
"Hey, are you not the shopkeeper of this Black Hill Pavilion?"
the girl asked with some surprise and looked around. In this shop, it was obvious that only Lu Chen was looking after the shop.
"I'm not the shopkeeper here,"
Lu Chen said seriously. "In fact, I am the uncle of the shopkeeper. Today, he went out to buy goods, so I came to help look after the shop."
"Oh, I see."
The girl nodded as if she believed him. However, when she looked at the simple appearance of the shop, her face gradually revealed a difficult expression.
Lu Chen asked with a smile, "What do you need? Tell me. If there is, I will show it to you. If there isn't, then there's nothing I can do. Anyways, I can't force you to buy or sell in broad daylight, right?"
The girl smiled again. At that moment, the beauty of the girl hit him in the face, like the clear sky after a storm. There was a refreshing atmosphere.
"I want to buy some Congjuzi."
Lu Chen nodded and said, "Congjuzi, wait, let me see if there is any."
Okay."
The girl smiled. Lu Chen searched the shelves and finally found this relatively common spirit material in a shelf. He put it on the counter and said, "There really is. If it was anything else, I wouldn't give it to you. But this spirit material, Congjuzi, is taken from the seed.
There is a hard shell on the outside and it will not spoil after 10 years. You should be able to use it. The girl thought about it and nodded. Yes, that is true. My master also said so. All right then, I'll buy 10. Okay. Lu Chen picked out 10 songjuzi that looked good. He found a cloth and wiped them clean. Then, he wrapped them in paper and handed them to the girl. The girl smiled sweetly and took the paper bag. As she put it away, she reached into her pocket and said, "How much? Ah." Suddenly, she exclaimed and her expression changed. It was as if she was stunned. Lu Chen looked at her and said, "What is it?" The girl's cheeks flushed red. Her skin looked white and rosy, adding to her beauty. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She said, "I seem to have forgotten to bring money." "Oh, I see." Lu Chen sighed. This business was too difficult. There was hesitation on the girl's face. After a moment, she said awkwardly to Lu Chen, "Uncle, I have an urgent need for this songjuzi. Can I take it first? I will have someone send the money later." Halfway through her words, she suddenly found that Lu Chen was staring at her with a strange expression. She couldn't help but lower her voice. A moment later she couldn't help but ask, "Can't I?" Lu Chen coughed and didn't answer. He asked instead, "What did you call me just now?" The girl stilled and said, "Uncle. You are so old, you are the uncle of the shopkeeper here." "Oh, okay." Lu Chen shook his head and then said seriously to the girl, "No, you cannot owe money for the goods." The girl was shocked. She seemed to want to say something but her face seemed to become even redder. She said in a low voice, "I am not that kind of person. I said I will return it. I will definitely return it." That grace of lowering her head was enough to intoxicate people without drinking. Her watery eyes were enough to make the world fall for her. Lu Chen shook his head and said, "You can't." The girl looked sadly at him and could only put the paper bag in her hand back on the counter. Then she turned and walked out. Just as she was about to reach the door, Lu Chen's voice suddenly came from behind her. "Hey, your money bag is gone." The girl's footsteps suddenly stopped. Looking back, she saw that Lu Chen had walked out from behind the counter. At the same time, he was holding a small red bag with a flower embroidered with gold thread. "Ah, I was wondering where the money bag went." The girl's beautiful eyes widened and she quickly walked over. She said with a giggle and then reached out to Lu Chen. Lu Chen let her grab the small bag but he didn't let go. The girl pulled and was somewhat surprised. She looked at Lu Chen and said, "Uncle, why don't you let go?" Lu Chen said, "I can return the money bag to you, but you should also return the songjuzi in your sleeve to me." As he spoke, he didn't look at the girl's suddenly stiff smile. He sighed and said, "Also, don't call me uncle. It sounds weird." Chapter 85. The girl tugged at the pouch twice, but found that Lu Chen's grip was exceptionally firm, and she couldn't pull it back. After her expression changed, the gentleness and carefulness on her face suddenly disappeared, and was replaced by a kind of annoyance. With a snort, her other hand suddenly raised, and a paper bag actually flew out from her sleeve, smashing towards Lu Chen's face. Lu Chen reached out to catch it, and casually grabbed it with his hand, then nodded and let go. The girl took a step back, and first hid the small bag in her bosom, then looked up and down at Lu Chen, coldly snorted and said, "I can't tell, you actually know such despicable methods." Lu Chen laughed, and said, "I used to rely on this to make a living." As he said that, his gaze fell on the girl's exceptionally beautiful face, and he frowned, saying, "Little girl, since you have such a beautiful appearance, why can't you do anything? Do you really have to do this? Don't blame me for not warning you. These despicable people are not good. With your beautiful face, if you aren't careful, I'm afraid you'll be eaten alive." "Oh." The girl didn't look old, only about 10 years old, but at this moment, after removing her disguise, her body suddenly had an additional mature aura. Her young face revealed a disdainful look, and she looked at Lu Chen saying, "So, you are still a good person?" Lu Chen said, "I can't say that I'm a good person, but it's not bad to remind you, what do you think?" "Che." The girl sneered, and said, "You're just saying it casually. Less nonsense. Do you have anything else? If not, I'm leaving." This swindler was actually so self-righteous, as if not stealing from Lu Chen, but Lu Chen's fault. Lu Chen also couldn't help but laugh. But first, this girl was really too young, and second, her face was already very beautiful at such a young age. It really made people unable to harden their hearts to do anything. He immediately waved his hand and said, "You can leave anyway, next time you're caught, I won't be so polite. This broken shop, I'm not just passing by, even if you pay me money, I won't come again." The girl angrily shouted, then turned around and walked out of the door. The black dog next to her wagged its tail and came over, jumping enthusiastically beside the girl. The girl looked at the black dog, and especially saw the lame Atsu's hind legs. She was first startled, but then her eyes became slightly soft, and she reached out her hand to touch the head of the Atsu, and said, "This dog is much cuter than your master." The Atsu tilted its head, and stuck out its tongue, and looked affectionate. Suddenly Lu Chen from behind and said, "Atsu, that's a bad guy, he wants to steal our things." The Atsu didn't seem to react for a moment, and blankly looked back at Lu Chen. Lu Chen sternly said, "Be fierce to her. Bite her." Atsu jumped up, as if he had suddenly come to his senses. Immediately, the hair on his neck stood up, and he let out a low growl, baring his fangs at the young girl. He looked like a hungry wolf, ready to pounce and bite someone in the next moment. "Ah!" The girl was shocked, and suddenly jumped away as if she was electrocuted. She quickly ran out of the door and then cursed at the shop, "A house full of monsters, bad people, and stupid dogs." "Woof woof woof woof." As the Atsu roared, it suddenly rushed out. The girl screamed and ran away. Her speed was extremely fast, and in the blink of an eye, she ran out of the alley. The Atsu chased a step, but was stopped by Lu Chen from behind, and then turned back bitterly. But then it seemed to be happy again, and quite proud. It circled around Lu Chen a few times, and kept barking, as if it wanted to take credit. Lu Chen sighed, looked at it, squatted down, and grabbed the head of the Atsu in front of his eyes, pulled its ears, and scratched the dog's fur. After looking left and right, he frowned and said, "Strange, I remember that snow wolves and black jackals are intelligent and cunning monsters. Why do you always look stupid?" "Woof woof woof woof." The Atsu stuck out half of its tongue and licked Lu Chen, and looked very happy. In the evening, old Ma came back. As soon as he entered the house, he pulled Lu Chen to close the door and went to the backyard. Then he said with a smile, "It's finally done." Lu Chen nodded and said, "That's good. When do we go up the mountain?" Old Ma said, "In 3 days. A few days ago, the Kunlun party just held the annual Immortal Appraisal meeting, and they accepted a new batch of disciples. Recently, it's the time for those who have no chance to officially join the sect to display their supernatural powers. You're not conspicuous at all among them." Lu Chen looked at him and said with a smile, "What do you mean by displaying their supernatural powers?" Old Ma laughed and said in a low voice, "On the surface, the Kunlun party wants to accept so many disciples, but in fact, there are a lot of people who want to squeeze their own children into the sect. Don't tell me you don't know about this." Lu Chen shrugged and said, "From what you said, there are quite a lot of disciples like me who sneak into the sect in a roundabout way." Old Ma said with a smile, "Of course. The Immortal Appraisal meeting has accepted 500 people, and they can at least squeeze another 200 or 300 in." "Damn." Lu Chen was shocked and said, "There are so many." Old Ma snorted and said, "The more they accept, the more spirit stones they can collect. This business is better than anything else." Lu Chen said with emotion, "You're right." At night, 2 people and a dog sat in the small courtyard again. Old Ma took a sip of wine and said to Lu Chen with a frown, "You let that little girl go just like that?" Lu Chen said helplessly, "What else can I do? I can't really detain her, can I?" Old Ma thought for a while and said, "At least you should ask about her identity, background, and name, right?" Lu Chen shook his head and said, "It's useless to ask. It's all fake." Old Ma clicked his tongue, and his eyes suddenly became a little strange. He looked at Lu Chen and said, "Speaking of which, why didn't I notice that you have this trick before? I didn't see you learn it from that person." Lu Chen smiled, picked up a cup of wine and lightly said, "That was before I met him. I was muddling around in this city, trying to survive. Aside from picking up trash, I also learned how to steal and swindle people." Old Ma was stunned, and looked at Lu Chen for a long time without saying anything. After a long time he said in a low voice, "It's not easy to be a lowly person. You were so young back then. Did you suffer a lot?" "Yes." Listening to Lu Chen's extremely simple answer, Old Ma didn't know what to say for a moment. After a while, he laughed dryly and changed the topic, and said, "Haha, that little girl is really unlucky. She happened to pass by here and wanted to do some business, but she actually met an expert. She must have been half dead with anger." "No." Lu Chen suddenly interrupted Old Ma. Old Ma was startled and said, "What's wrong?" Lu Chen smiled, and then he gazed at the cold and dark night sky in the distance. After that he took a sip of wine and said, "All those years ago when I did all these things that harmed people, I'd always checked and calculated carefully, and there was no such thing as a coincidence. As for whether she happened to pass by, I don't know." Chapter 86. What should we do? Old Ma furrowed his brows in distress and said, "It feels a little troublesome." Lu Chen glanced at him and said, "Maybe they aren't here for me." Old Ma was stunned and said, "Then who are they here for?" "You." Lu Chen looked at Old Ma's fat face and said seriously, "To be able to open a shop in such a desolate alley, he must be a fat sheep that is easily deceived. I think that's what that little girl is thinking." "Get lost." Old Ma scolded angrily and then took out a book as thick as a finger and threw it at him. Lu Chen caught it and flipped it open to take a look. At the same time he asked, "What is this?" Some of the most famous people in the Kunlun sect, the young geniuses of the younger generation, the children of the aristocratic families with deep backgrounds, and some people with eccentric temperament and behavior. Brief information about them, including Dao techniques, magical treasures, and so on, are all written on it. In addition, there are also some situations in the Kunlun party's main halls. You can take a look when you have time. After you have written it down, burn this book. Lu Chen was silent for a long time. The joking expression on his face disappeared and he sat up straight. Then, with a serious expression, he said to Old Ma, "Thank you for your hard work." Old Ma grinned and said, "This kind of thing should be shown to people who understand. Only then will it be satisfying." Lu Chen sighed and said to him, "With this kind of ability, you can actually do a lot of big things. It's a bit of a disadvantage to hang around with people like me." Old Ma said, "In this world, is there anything bigger than what you want to do?" Lu Chen sneered and put away the book. Then, he picked up the wine pot and poured wine for Old Ma and himself. At the same time he asked, "About the person we are looking for, what do you know?" Old Ma shook his head and said, "I have no clue. We do not know anything about that person, whether he is a man or a woman, whether he is old or young, whether his cultivation level is high or low. Other than knowing that he is hiding in the Kunlun party to do something big, we do not know anything else." Lu Chen raised his cup and clinked it with Old Ma's, then drained it in one gulp and said, "Take your time to find it." 3 days later, Lu Chen went to the Kunlun mountain and joined the Kunlun party, becoming a Kunlun disciple that was envied by most mortals. This was a layer of dazzling halo, like a gilded and dazzling coat, draped over his body. To outsiders, it looked so glorious, except for the insiders who were also on Kunlun Mountain. Just as Old Ma had said before, although the Kunlun sect, which had a history of 5,000 years, usually paid the most attention to rules and integrity, after so many years, the persistence passed down by the founding master was still flexible. Apart from the 500 new disciples who were officially accepted during the Grand Immortal Appraisal meeting, Kunlun sect had secretly added another 250 people into the sect. Lu Chen was one of them. Unfortunately, his innate aptitude was considered to be the worst among all of them. In the cultivation world, talent and talent were based on the 5 elements wheel in the dantian of the Sea of Qi. The more divine pillars, the higher the talent. Generally speaking, only disciples who had at least 2 5 elements divine pillars would be accepted by famous sects like the Kunlun party. The hope of a first pillar disciple was too small, and the loss outweighed the gain by placing spiritual materials and resources on such a person. Yes, Lu Chen was the kind of person that the loss outweighed the gain, but this kind of person was not rare in the Kunlun mountain, because who did not have the dream of becoming an immortal? No matter how bad one's talent was, there was always a little hope. Besides, even if there was no hope of becoming an immortal, if one could get some opportunities in the Kunlun mountain and practice some magic, Not only would one's strength increase greatly, one's life would also be extended a lot. Why not? This kind of thinking was naturally human nature.
As for the high and mighty elders of the Kunlun sect, it was impossible for them to care about these small matters.
Who didn't have a close relationship with someone? Furthermore, it wasn't like they were sent in for free. Therefore, in such a bright and slightly gray background, Lu Chen safely and calmly entered the Kunlun party, without attracting anyone's attention, and became a servant disciple with the lowest position in the Kunlun party. However, since he was of the lowest position, the Kunlun party would not keep idle people, so Lu Chen was quickly arranged to go to the Bai Chao Tang of the Kunlun party, and like the many other servant disciples, he grew all kinds of spiritual herbs for the Kunlun party. The majestic Kunlun was the first famous mountain in the western land. From a distance, one could only see the majestic peaks rising and falling, and the clouds were like waves.
In the deepest part of the huge mountain range, the clouds gathered like a vast ocean, and as far as the eye could see, one could vaguely see the 4 faintly discernible figures of strange peaks floating high above the clouds.
It could be said to be a magical place that seized all the creation of heaven and earth.
However, this kind of immortal spiritual land, historically, only the most elite part of the Kunlun party could set foot in it. Ordinary servant disciples did not even have the qualification to go near it.
In the blink of an eye, Lu Chen had already entered the Kunlun party for a month. Over the past month, he was no different from the people around him. Everyone woke up early and slept late every day, working hard for the spiritual herbs in the Kunlun immortal family's spiritual fields, hoping that one day they could get a lucky chance and stand out from the crowd. There were many servant disciples in the Kunlun party. It was said that among the 100,000 disciples, perhaps 60 to 70,000 were such people. To some extent, it was the hard work of the countless common people at the foot of the mountain, and the many servant disciples on the mountain that supported a small part of the elites of the Kunlun party. As for the Bai Chao Tang, after Lu Chen came here, he was given a spiritual field of 1 mu, so that he could plant spiritual herbs. Every time it was harvest time, he had to hand in a fixed amount of harvest, and then he would be considered to have completed his task. If he did not hand in enough, he would be punished, and if he had an extra harvest, he would be rewarded.
Most of the servant disciples relied on these extra harvests that they had worked hard to obtain in exchange for a little hope of standing out in the future.
Hope was the most beautiful thing, was it not? For most people it was, but for Lu Chen it was not.
He quietly lived in the Kunlun party, and then quietly observed the giant Kunlun party in the shadows of the crowd.
After slowly familiarizing himself with the situation here, he also began to touch the things he wanted little by little. Of course, that mysterious devil cult spy was still nowhere to be found. But in this month, Lu Chen had already learned some things. For example, the 2 supremes of the Kunlun party, Hakushin Jinkuan was in closed-door training on the mountain peak among the clouds all year round, while Supremes Tianlan went to the immortal city of Zhengxianmeng and seemed to be very busy. This year, the Kunlun party had accepted more than 700 new disciples. Fortunately, there were many talented newcomers, but those were phoenixes that flew up the branches, and had almost no interaction with sparrows like Lu Chen. And Hong Chuan, whom he had met before, had indeed left the Kunlun mountain a few days ago. It was said that he had gone to the distant northern region to hone his state of mind and cultivation. When Lu Chen heard the news, he sighed for that friend in his heart. But very soon, he thought that he would be very quiet and would be dormant for a very long time in the Kunlun mountain. But suddenly there were waves. It was one afternoon a month after he went up the mountain. At the edge of the forest where his spiritual field was located, he once again saw a familiar person coming out of the forest. It was Xian. That day, Xian's face seemed a little pale.
Although her face was still so beautiful, she seemed to be a little absent-minded and did not notice that among the many servant disciples working in the spiritual field not far away, there was Lu Chen.
Lu Chen quietly turned around, thinking that Kunlun Mountain was so big, if he missed it today, he might as well not see it again in the future. Trouble. Then, he suddenly heard a scream coming from behind. The voice was sharp, and for some reason, it suddenly reminded him of the journey in the land of chaos. Lu Chen shook his head and sighed, thinking that it was troublesome. Chapter 87. Lu Chen's initial reaction was to turn around and leave.
He was prepared to quietly avoid her.
After all, Kunlun Mountain was so big and Exian did not seem to have seen him. If he missed this chance, he might not see her again in the future. But the scream that followed was indeed a little frightening. It was as if Exian had suddenly seen the most terrifying thing in the world. Her scream was heart-wrenching. Lu Chen stopped in his tracks, feeling a little helpless. At that moment, his mind replayed the journey with Exian in the land of chaos from beginning to end. He muttered, "It can't be. I don't remember doing anything to you. Are you so afraid to see me?" But when he turned his head to look in the direction of Exian, he suddenly frowned. He saw that when Exian walked out of the forest, a figure suddenly ran out from behind her and grabbed her hand. When the figure that appeared from behind appeared in everyone's line of sight, it immediately caused a commotion among the crowd of odd job disciples who had slowly gathered to watch the show. Even the usually calm Lu Chen's expression changed slightly. At the same time, he instantly understood why Exian would let out such a tragic scream. It was a man wearing the Kunlun Party disciple uniform. But his face was completely destroyed. At least a dozen shocking scars remained on his face. His facial features were terrible. One of his ears was missing, his nose was gone, and there was a big cut on his chin. A terrible scar had slashed across his left eye, leaving a pitted red flesh. It seemed that this eyeball had also been destroyed. This face looked like it had been slashed countless times by a sharp blade, or had been ruthlessly gnawed on by a terrifying beast. It was completely devoid of human form. It was hard to imagine that a person who had suffered such serious injuries could actually survive that disaster. At this moment, it was a bright and sunny day. Under the bright sky, the surrounding people all felt a trace of coldness, and a few timid female disciples even closed their eyes and looked away, not daring to look directly at that person. The terrifying face that resembled a demon from hell suddenly appeared behind Exian. After grabbing her, the face leaned in and let out a deep, furious growl. When she lifted her eyes, the face was already inches away from her. No wonder she let out such a shrill scream. "Let me go! Let me go!" However, to Lu Chen's surprise, Exian did not faint from fright. Instead, she screamed in horror and struggled with all her might, trying to break free from the monstrous man's grasp. At the same time, she cried out repeatedly, "Shut up!" The man with the terrifying face let out a low roar, but that did not calm Exian down. Instead, she struggled even more intensely. This scene was seen by the surrounding people, and there was a sudden uproar. A beautiful girl was being bullied by such a monster. No one could stand it. Suddenly, 7 or 8 people from the side came over and shouted to stop it. Lu Chen also took 2 steps forward. No matter what, he had some friendship with Exian. At the same time, he also had some doubts in his heart. After joining the Kunlun Party for a month, he had gradually learned a little about this famous sect. Although it was not as perfect as the legends said, the Kunlun Party was still a place that followed rules. In general, it was impossible for there to be any public bullying on the Kunlun Mountain. However, the scene in front of him was obviously not right. Just when Lu Chen was hesitating whether he should go forward to help, he suddenly heard Exian's voice crying, "Let go, Senior He! I beg you, don't do this." Lu Chen's body trembled. He immediately focused his attention and looked towards that man. As expected, when he looked carefully, he could vaguely make out a little of that handsome Kunlun disciple's appearance that he had met in Crescent City that day from that little bit of residual outline. He gang. Didn't he already die on the Black Armor Mountain in the Land of Chaos? On that day, the scene of a large group of terrible black jackals swarming on the Black Armor Mountain was still fresh in Lu Chen's memory. Then when he looked at He Gang's face again, those clear and terrifying scars that seemed to have been left behind by sharp claws and terrifying beast teeth, Lu Chen couldn't help but feel a slight chill in his heart. Exian was crying and shouting in panic. The odd job disciples next to her obviously did not know He Gang, so they surrounded him with righteous indignation. But He Gang also seemed to be very emotional and strange. Under the crowd's gaze, he did not have the slightest intention of retreating, and even glared at the people around him with terrible anger. Seeing that the scene suddenly became tense and on the verge of breaking out, suddenly, a loud shout came from behind the crowd. "Stop, what do you want?" This shout was full of momentum, and the tone was loud, instantly suppressing all the other voices. After a moment, a tall man walked quickly to the center. He first glanced at He Gang and Exian, and his face slightly darkened,
but he did not lose his temper. Then he turned to look at the crowd around him, frowned and said in a deep voice, "Back off!
What are you doing here? Do you want to rebel?" Lu Chen stood in the crowd and glanced at this person. Seeing that he had thick eyebrows and a square face, he was a disciple of the Kunlun party's Bai Chao Tang, who was sent to manage the spiritual field. His name was Zhou Kuei. After all, almost all the odd job disciples were newcomers who knew nothing about cultivation, and planting spiritual fields still needed some tricks, so Bai Chao Tang would often send some disciples down. About every 100 odd job disciples would have an official disciple in charge, and at the same time, they would teach the tricks of planting and some of the most basic cultivation methods. Zhou Kuei was such a person. Those who could get such a job were basically in the foundation realm, so in the Kunlun party, he could also be regarded as an elite disciple who had reached a higher level. Usually, the odd job disciples naturally respected Zhou Kuei very much. Although they only called him senior brother, in reality, his position was like a teacher and a father, and they did not dare to disobey him easily. But today's scene was really infuriating, and a bold person in the crowd shouted loudly, "Senior brother Zhou, it's not that we want to cause trouble, but that person is bullying our junior sister in broad daylight." Zhou Kuei's face was as dark as water. He slowly turned around and glanced at He Gang's hand that was still tightly gripping Xian's wrist. He snorted and said, "Junior brother He, you're not doing this right?" Facing this Bai Chao Tang disciple Zhou Kuei, whose cultivation was in the foundation realm, He Gang's imposing manner was obviously weaker, but he still raised his head and shouted through gritted teeth, "I didn't do anything, I just wanted to chat with junior sister E, what did I do wrong?" Zhou Kuei's gaze fell on Xian's pretty but tear-stained face. A trace of sympathy seemed to flash across his eyes, but he still sighed and said, "Junior sister E, is it like this?" Xian struggled with all her might. Perhaps because Zhou Kuei was right beside her, He Gang finally did not dare to use force anymore, letting her withdraw her arm, but there was already an obvious red mark on her wrist. Then, Xian glanced at Zhou Kuei. A complicated expression flashed across her face, like fear, regret, and also like she was at a loss. In the end, she slowly lowered her head and softly replied, "Yes." The odd job disciples in the crowd immediately burst into an uproar. Everyone had a look of surprise on their faces, and Lu Chen in the crowd frowned, looking deeply at Xian. Chapter 88.
The wide spiritual field that everyone was currently in was actually a flat and wide valley in the Kunlun mountain range. It was surrounded by mountains, and in the middle was a rare expanse of flat land that was rich in spiritual energy and fertile. It was a very important production area for the Kunlun party's Bai Chao Tang. Due to the fact that the largest mountain next to it was the Rock Mountain, this valley basin was named the Rock Mountain Valley. At this moment, the warm sunlight shone down from the sky, shining on Rock Valley. The mountain wind blew through the valley from the forest, and countless spiritual plants danced in the wind, like a magnificent wave. At the edge of the forest at the foot of Rock Mountain, the atmosphere was cold and strange. Many servant disciples gathered there, looking at the young girl with her head lowered in disbelief. Xian's panicked crying didn't seem like she was just chatting in the forest. She was obviously frightened. But in the end, the victim herself said that she was fine, so what else could they do?
Zhou Kuei reacted quickly.
He turned around and shouted at the servant disciples, "Okay.
Didn't you see that junior sister E said that she was fine? What are you still doing here? Go back to work." Many janitor disciples looked at each other in dismay.
Most of the new disciples were young and full of vigor.
However, everyone knew that there might be some inside story behind this situation. So, under the whispers and strange gazes, the crowd slowly dispersed. After Zhou Kuei dispersed the crowd, he frowned at He Gang and Xian at the edge of the forest. He wanted to turn around and leave with a straight face. Who knew that at this time, Xian suddenly ran a few steps towards him and said, "Senior brother Zhou, I'll go with you." Zhou Kuei's body trembled slightly.
Before he could say anything, He Gang, who was behind him, already said loudly, "Junior sister E, I still have something to say to you."
Xian didn't even look at him. She looked at Zhou Kuei with pleading eyes. Zhou Kuei was silent for a moment, then nodded his head and said to Xian, "Okay." Xian immediately looked happy and nodded.
He Gang was shocked. "Senior brother Zhou, what are you doing?" Zhou Kuei's eyes flashed with a trace of impatience. He turned to look at He Gang and frowned. Junior brother He, everything should be done in moderation.
Besides, junior sister E has something to do with me. Are you trying to discipline me? He Gang subconsciously flinched under Zhou Kuei's piercing stare.
After a moment, he seemed to grit his teeth and glanced fiercely at Exin, then turned around and left without a word. As Exin watched He Gang leave, she finally heaved a sigh of relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from her shoulders. Zhou Kuei saw her expression and his eyes softened.
He asked softly, "Are you all right? Are you all right?" Exin nodded silently.
Zhou Kuei said, "Let's go."
He walked forward.
Exin silently followed beside him, but after walking for a while, she suddenly heard Zhou Kuei's voice. "Junior sister E, you still have to think of a solution for this matter yourself." Exin raised her head to look at Zhou Kuei in a daze, only to see that Zhou Kuei was not looking at her. Instead, he was looking straight ahead, but he said in a voice that only she could hear, "I have known Senior He for many years, and I know that his talent are extraordinary. Now that he is about to break through to the Golden Elixir realm, at his age, his future can be said to be limitless." He turned around with a sympathetic expression mixed with some helplessness. "It doesn't matter if I help you once in a while. Senior brother He will probably just smile when he hears it. But if I help him again and again, I'm afraid he won't like it. Do you understand?" Exin's face turned pale. After a while she lowered her head and said in a low voice, "I understand." At this moment, she seemed to be in a daze. Her face was as pale as paper. She seemed to be trapped in some kind of fear for the future, so much so that she didn't notice that in a spiritual field not far from them, Lu Chen was standing there thoughtfully looking at her figure. The Kunlun party was a famous sect with many rules. But after so many years, it wasn't that it didn't care about human feelings. Living in the mountains was hard and cultivating was boring, so the sect didn't strictly forbid its disciples from leaving the mountain. Generally speaking, even if it was a part-time disciple, as long as he could guarantee to come back before the curfew, the Kunlun party's mountain gate guards wouldn't stop him. However, it was precisely because of the curfew that anyone who violated it would be severely punished. Therefore, unless they received orders from the sect to go out, most people could only stroll in Kunwu City at the foot of the mountain. However, the Kunlun mountain range was very vast. Generally, the disciples who were assigned to cultivate or work on the mountains far away from the mountain gate of the southern foothills would need several hours to reach the mountain gate if they didn't have the ability to fly fast. In fact, they wouldn't be able to go down the mountain. The Shurpan Valley where Lu Chen lived was about 2 hours away from the mountain gate of the southern foothills. It wasn't far, but it wasn't close either. As long as he could squeeze out some time, he could go to Kunwu City for a stroll. In Kunwu City, the fatty old Ma's Black Hill Pavilion was naturally the place he often went to. The remote and quiet alley was as deep and serene as before. It seemed that no matter how many years passed, there wouldn't be a single customer. Old Ma sat on the threshold with a somewhat sad expression. He sighed and said, "Alas, when will there be any business?" "Don't think about it." Sitting behind the counter in the room, Lu Chen yawned lazily and said, "Just give up. You're not cut out to do business." Old Ma spat and said indignantly, "Bullshit. Your father was born to be a genius. In the future, I'll definitely do something big and earn a fortune that can rival a country. At that time, you can just wait to kneel in front of me." Lu Chen said, "Wake up. It's not dark yet. Stop dreaming." Old Ma muttered. He probably felt that it was really inappropriate to talk about ideals with this person, so he said, "You've been on the mountain for a month now. How's the situation?" Lu Chen shrugged and said, "In the beginning, I couldn't say anything. However, this Kunlun party really has a lot of rules. It's a 5,000-year famous sect. It's not strange," Old Ma said with a smile. Then he glanced at the empty alley outside and said, "By the way, I found the person you asked me to investigate last time." Lu Chen raised his eyebrows and looked over. He said, You actually found him. I've underestimated you." Old Horse had a smug look on his face as he said, "Nonsense. Who do you think I am? As long as I want to investigate, there's nothing on this Kunlun mountain that I can't figure out." Lu Chen was too lazy to care about this guy's bragging. He just asked,
Who is that person? Old Ma said, Moonlight cut is extremely difficult to practice. There are not many young disciples who can practice it. Moreover, it's a woman. Moreover, during that period of time, she was not on the mountain of Kunlun. After searching for a long time, there's probably only one person left. Su Qingjun, the only disciple of the Kunlun party's Masato Kahara. Chapter 89. Mu Yuan. Lu Chen frowned slightly.
After pondering for a moment, he asked with a strange look in his eyes, "The one from the Tieji branch?"
Old Ma nodded and said, "That's right. That old man is one of the 4 Yuanying Zhenren of the Tieji branch of the Kunlun party. He's also recognized as the strongest in Taoism and divine powers. It's not an exaggeration to say that he's the leader of the Tieji branch." Lu Chen nodded and said, "What about Su Qingjun herself?" Old Ma said, "She's very outstanding. She's extremely talented. It's said that she's one of the top 4 pillars. She can be said to be very gifted. Her progress in Taoism is very fast and she's worthy of the word genius. She's only 22 years old, but she's already at the peak of the foundational state."
Among the young foundational state disciples of the Kunlun party, there are about a dozen of them who've reached the peak of the Jindan state and are only one step away.
But the most famous ones are Su Qingjun, He Yi, Song Huaisong, and Feng Yu. At this point, Old Ma paused and looked at Lu Chen. "At such a young age, you are only one step away from the Golden Core realm.
With this kind of strength and talent, the difference between you and an ordinary Foundation realm disciple is like heaven and earth."
I don't need to say more, right? Lu Chen smiled and said, "If she's lucky enough, she might have a chance to peek into the Yuanying state in the future."
Yes, becoming a Zhenren.
Old Ma sighed with some emotion. He then said to Lu Chen seriously, "Since you know it, don't think too much, okay? That girl has no grudge against you. She didn't really hurt you in the land of chaos. You don't have to go against such a proud girl, do you?" Lu Chen's expression didn't change. It seemed that he didn't take this matter to heart. He said casually, "I don't plan to do anything to her. I'm just curious." Old Ma stared at him for a moment, then snorted and said, "That's not necessarily the case. You're full of evil tricks, sinister and cunning. Who knows what you'll do later? Let me tell you, although Kunlun's iron branch is weak, there are still 4 Yuanying Zhenren sitting there. A genius disciple like Su Qingjun would have a limitless future. Taiji would definitely protect her like a precious treasure. Don't look for trouble." "Hey!" Lu Chen spat and said, "I came to Kunlun Mountain for the sake of the common people of the world, the righteous path of life, yet I had no choice but to risk my own safety to do such a dangerous thing. Why do you, this servant, always regard me as someone who is worse than the devil cult?" Old Ma said seriously, "You're right, that's the truth." As he said this, he suddenly lowered his head to avoid a stool that flew towards him. Then he looked around and smiled. "Oh yes, where's Atsu? Why don't I see it? I just brought a bag of meat bones for it. It's chewing on it in the backyard." Lu Chen said. "This black dog's appetite seems to be very big. It's eating me poor. Hurry up and bring it up the mountain. Wait for another 2 months. I'm not familiar with it yet." Lu Chen said casually, "Oh yes, there's one more thing. Help me check it out. It's about the girl from the Yi family I told you about last time." As he said this, Lu Chen told Old Ma about the scene he saw at the spiritual field in Shurpan Valley. In the end he frowned and said, "He Gang didn't die. And looking at Exin, she seems to be afraid of him. I'm afraid there's something strange about it." "Okay, leave it to me," Old Ma said with a smile. Lu Chen stood up, looked at the sky, and said, "All right, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. I'm going back to the mountain." Old Ma nodded and watched as Lu Chen walked to the door. Just as he was about to step over the threshold, Old Ma suddenly said, "There's something you might not know. This year, the Kunlun Party's Immortal Appraisal Conference had a great harvest. The Kunlun Party had recruited many talented 3 pillars and even 4 pillars. However, there's one thing that the Kunlun Party suppressed." Lu Chen's body trembled slightly. He turned to look at Old Ma. Old Ma looked straight into his eyes. For some reason,
There was a complicated and incomprehensible light in his eyes. He said softly, "I heard that during the conference, they found a rare one-in-a-million peerless genius. That person had all 5 elements, and there were 5 pillars on the Sea of Qi."
Lu Chen's expression changed slightly. It seemed that even a calm person like him was startled after hearing about this matter. But very quickly, a trace of a smile appeared on his face. A self-deprecating smile appeared on his face. "Amazing! A 5 pillars genius," he murmured, then raised his head to look at the sky. He said lightly, "Just like me, isn't it?" Old Ma was silent.
It was already evening when he returned to the mountain.
When Lu Chen walked through the mountain gate and walked along the mountain path to his residence at the foot of Sherpan Mountain, the sky gradually darkened. Night came. At night, Kunlun Mountain was still majestic, but it was less majestic than during the day, and more distant and deep in the night. Each mountain peak was like a silent giant, quietly standing in the darkness, quietly watching Lu Chen walk between the mountains. Unknowingly, there was no one else on the mountain path. Only Lu Chen walked alone. The night was somewhat desolate, and the mountain wind was somewhat cold. It whistled past, and the faint starlight shone on the ground. One could see the swaying shadows, like dancing demons and ghosts. There was still some time before the curfew. Lu Chen looked at the night sky and expressionlessly walked on this dark road. Gradually, even he himself seemed to blend into it, becoming a part of those terrifying shadows. When it was too quiet, one's thoughts would spread out, making one's thoughts seem to be more than usual. As Lu Chen walked, he suddenly thought of the small village that he had lived in for 10 years, and the beautiful girl who was already sleeping by the Dragon Lake on Tea Mountain. At this time, would there be a cold wind blowing by the Dragon Lake? Maybe she would also feel a little cold, because she was afraid of the cold before. Lu Chen suddenly shook his head, freeing himself from these thoughts, and then continued walking. The night was still cold, and then he thought of the day before they parted, the strange look in Old Ma's eyes when he looked at him. Lu Chen knew what Old Ma meant.
Although that fatty was not a good person, but for so many years, he was the person that he trusted the most.
He knew that Old Ma meant well. Old Ma actually felt that it was not worth it for him, and somewhat regretted it.
However, some words could not be said to anyone, whether it was him or Old Ma, or perhaps everyone actually understood in their hearts. If it was not good enough, how could it be used as a successful bait? If it was not an exceptional talent, how would the evil sect elder, that kind of person, be interested in it?
Sacrifice?
Perhaps only that big fatty, who was always hidden in the depths of the light, was the truly ruthless and ruthless person. The mountain breeze was faint, blowing past his clothes, as if there was a bone-chilling cold. Lu Chen gently pulled his clothes, thinking that if there was a chance in the future, he should go back to the Dragon Lake on Tea Mountain to take a look, add more soil for Ding Dong's grave, and plant more trees beside it. While he was thinking of this, Lu Chen's body suddenly stopped. His footsteps abruptly stopped. In the depths of the winding mountain path, hidden in the dark shadows, in the deep darkness, a soft, trembling whimper suddenly came from an unknown place. In this desolate and cold night, it sounded like the weeping of a night ghost, faintly coming over. The shadows of the surrounding tall mountains, at this moment, seemed to suddenly cover down, making this section of the mountain path seem especially dark. The night was deep. It was a desolate time. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.